She came as his May-lord or bride, but the whole town turned against her, until one cowboy chose her by the fire. When Rose Whitaker stepped down from the train in Mercy Bend, Colorado, every face on the platform turned toward her as if she had brought a storm with her. She felt it before she understood it, the silence, the sharp eyes, the little pause in the air when a stranger arrives and a town decides it already knows her story. Rose kept one gloved hand on the handle of her brown leather valise and lifted her chin just enough to meet the staring without inviting it. She was 29 years old, too old in some women's opinion to be arriving as a May-lord or bride, too quiet in others' opinion to be worth trusting, and too educated for a frontier town that liked its women warm, smiling, and easy to understand. The train hissed behind her. Coal smoke drifted over the wooden platform. Somewhere down the street, a wagon wheel struck a rut, and a horse gave a restless snort. Rose looked past the depot sign, past the dust, past the row of curious townspeople, searching for the man whose letters had carried her across half the country. Wade Harlan stood beside a buckboard near the hitching rail. He was taller than she expected, broad through the shoulders, with a weathered brown coat, a black hat held low over his eyes, and the stillness of a man who did not need to move to be noticed. He was not handsome in the polished city way. His face had sun, wind, and hard winters written into it, but there was something steady about him, something that made Rose's fingers loosen slightly on the valise. He did not smile for the crowd. He did not pretend this was a grand, romantic arrival. He simply stepped forward, took off his hat, and said, "Miss Whitaker." "Yes," she answered. His gaze moved over her face, not rudely, but carefully, as if he was making sure the woman in front of him matched the voice he had learned from 6 letters. "I'm Wade Harlan." "I know." The corner of his mouth shifted, almost a smile. "I suppose you would." That was the first thing about him that eased her. He did not talk more than he needed to. He reached for her trunk, and she let him take it. When he lifted it into the wagon, one of the women near the depot whispered something behind a gloved hand. Rose did not turn. She had learned long ago that turning only gave whispers more importance than they deserved. Wade heard it. She saw that he heard it by the slight tightening at his jaw, but he said nothing. The silence bothered her more than the whisper. He helped her into the buckboard, then climbed up beside her. As the horses started forward, Mercy Bend unfolded in slow judgment around them. A dry goods store, a small church with white paint peeling at the steps, a blacksmith shop ringing with iron, women at windows, men leaning in doorways, children pretending not to stare. Rose sat straight, her gloved hands folded in her lap. She had been told all her life that straight posture showed good breeding. In Mercy Bend, she suspected it looked like pride. After several minutes, Wade said, "The ranch is 7 miles out. I read that in your letter. You remember everything from letters. Only what matters." He glanced at her then, and this time the almost smile reached his eyes for half a second. Rose looked toward the open land beyond town. "You wrote that the north pasture floods in spring." "It does." "And that your lower well runs cloudy after a hard rain." "It does that too." "You should raise the stone lip around it before winter." Wade turned his head slightly. "That's so." "It would keep the runoff from washing in." He studied the road ahead, but she saw the thought working in him. Some men disliked being advised by a woman. She had met plenty of them. Some made jokes. Some grew cold. Some took the advice later and pretended it had been their own idea. Wade only said, "I'll look at it." That was the second thing about him that eased her. The Harlan ranch sat in a wide valley where the grass ran gold under the afternoon sun, and the mountains stood blue in the distance like a promise nobody had written down. The house was plain but strong, with a stone chimney, a covered porch, and a barn set back from the yard. A red mare lifted her head from the rail as they approached. A windmill creaked in the soft wind. Rose stepped down and stood still for a moment. She had left behind a boarding room in St. Louis, a locked trunk of books, and a life that had grown smaller every year. She had not come west because she believed in fairy tales. She had come because Wade's letter had been honest. He had written that he needed a wife, not a decoration. He had written that his house was lonely, his ranch demanding, his town watchful, and his heart not easy to reach. Most men would not admit the last part. "This is a good place," she said. Wade looked at the house, then at the barn, then back at her. "It needs work." "Most good places do." For the first time, he looked truly caught off guard. Inside, the house smelled of coffee, leather, old wood, and ash. There were dishes stacked neatly but without care, a table scarred from years of use, and a bookshelf with 6 books arranged as if no hand had touched them in months. A stove sat cold against the wall. By the hearth, a chair faced the fireplace alone. Rose noticed that chair. Wade noticed her noticing. "My mother S," he said quietly. Rose did not ask if she was gone. The answer was in the way he looked at the chair. Instead, she removed her gloves and placed them on the table. "Where do you keep the flour?" He blinked once. "Pantry." "Then I'll make supper." "You just came off a long train ride." "And you drove 7 miles to fetch me." She looked at him plainly. "We are both tired. Hunger does not care." Something changed in his face then. Not softness, not yet, but recognition. He showed her the pantry. That evening, they ate beans, skillet bread, and fried potatoes at the kitchen table while the last light faded outside the window. They spoke little. Rose did not know how to be charming, and Wade did not seem to require it. He asked if the room upstairs would suit her. She said it would. He told her the minister could marry them properly on Sunday if she still wished to go forward. She said she had come with her mind made up, but she appreciated the chance to keep it that way. He looked down at his plate, as if hiding another almost smile. After supper, Wade built a fire. Rose stood near the hearth, watching him kneel and strike the match. His hands were rough, with a pale scar across one knuckle. He set the flame to the kindling with careful patience, then added wood until the first warmth breathed into the room. Outside, Mercy Bend was already carrying her name from parlor to porch, from store counter to church step. Rose could feel it, though she was 7 miles away. The town had seen her straight back, her reserved mouth, her city dress, and had begun making a woman out of pieces. Wade rose from the hearth and dusted his hands. "You don't have to win them over tonight," he said. Rose looked at him. He met her eyes, steady and unreadable. "This town takes time deciding what it thinks. And once it decides—" His jaw tightened again, the same way it had at the depot. "Then sometimes it needs time to learn it was wrong." The fire snapped between them. For reasons Rose could not explain, those plain words unsettled her more than a compliment would have. She had expected a practical arrangement. A roof. Work. Respect, perhaps, if she earned it. She had not expected a man who noticed the weight of a whisper and said something about it before she had to. She turned toward the flames before her face could show too much. Wade pulled a chair closer to the hearth, not too close to her, but close enough that the gesture could not be mistaken for indifference. "You can sit there," he said. Rose looked at the chair, then at him. The firelight moved over his face, softening the hard lines without removing them. Outside, a horse shifted in the dark, and the new house settled around her with small wooden sounds. She sat. Wade took the chair across from her. Neither spoke for a while. The silence was not empty. It was not cold. It was a strange, careful kind of peace, and Rose felt something in her chest loosen by one small, dangerous inch. Then from far off across the valley, a church bell rang in Mercy Bend. Wade heard it too. Rose watched the fire and wondered what kind of town waited for a bride to fail. And across from her, Wade Harlan watched the same flames, already knowing that Mercy Bend was not going to make this easy for either of them. By Sunday morning, Rose Whitaker became Rose Harlan in the little white church at the end of Mercy Bend's Main Street. The ceremony was small, simple, and watched with the kind of attention that made every breath feel louder than it was. Wade stood beside her in a dark coat brushed clean for the occasion, his hat held in both hands, his hair still marked where the brim had pressed it down. Rose wore her best blue dress, the one she had brought from St. Louis, wrapped in brown paper and tied with cotton string. It was not a wedding gown, but it was neat, modest, and fine enough to remind certain women that she had come from somewhere beyond their dusty streets. That did not help her. She heard the whispers before the minister began. She looked stern. City women always do. Poor Wade. Rose kept her eyes on the minister's Bible. Her face did not change. She had learned long ago that a woman could not stop people from speaking, but she could refuse to hand them the satisfaction of seeing the wound land. Wade stood still beside her, but she felt the change in him. It was small, a tightening, a quiet gathering of himself. His shoulder shifted just enough that his sleeve brushed hers. It was not an embrace. It was not even comfort, not in any way the room could accuse him of. But Rose knew he had heard. When the minister asked if Wade would take her as his wife, Wade answered, "I will," in a voice so steady it seemed to settle the room. When he asked Rose the same, she answered clearly, "I will." Somewhere behind her, a woman gave a little sniff, as if Rose's calmness itself had offended her. Afterward, people came forward because manners required it. They offered stiff smiles, brief congratulations, and careful looks that examined Rose from her bonnet to her boots. Mrs. Eliza Crowell, the minister's wife, pressed Rose's hand between both of hers and said, "We do hope you'll learn our ways quickly, dear." There was nothing cruel in the words. That made them harder to answer. Rose gave a polite nod. "I hope to learn what is worth learning." Mrs. Crowell's smile paused. Wade looked down at the floor. Rose realized too late that her honest answer had landed like a stone in a water bucket. At the church steps, a woman in a brown bonnet leaned toward another and murmured, "There it is." Rose pretended not to hear. Wade helped her into the wagon. This time she accepted his hand, not because she needed help, but because every eye in town was watching and she wanted to choose her own meaning before they chose one for her. His palm was rough and warm around her gloved fingers. On the ride home, the silence between them was different from the first day. It was heavier. At last Wade said, "Eliza Crowell means well most of the time." Most of the time. He looked toward the team, enough of the time that people forgive the rest. Rose watched the road. I did not mean to offend her. "I know." I answered plainly. "I know that too." A small wind moved over the grass. Rose folded her hands tighter in her lap. "In St. Louis," she said, "plain speech was considered useful. In Mercy Bend, plain speech is considered useful only after it has been wrapped in sugar and carried around the room twice." Despite herself, Rose looked at him. Wade's mouth did not move, but his eyes carried the faintest humor. A laugh almost rose in her throat. She stopped it quickly, surprised by it. He heard the almost laugh anyway. The ranch received them with quiet honesty. No staring faces, no measuring glances, just the lowing of cattle from the far field, the creak of the windmill, the smell of dust and sun-warmed wood. Rose stepped into the kitchen and removed her bonnet, breathing easier once the door shut behind them. Marriage, she discovered, did not change the work waiting in a house. There were dishes to wash, floors to sweep, linens to air, shelves to sort, and a pantry full of flour sacks marked in no order she could understand. Wade had managed the ranch well, but the house had been surviving, not living. Rose noticed these things the way some people noticed weather. By Monday, She had moved the coffee tin closer to the stove, separated the good beans from the spoiled, found 3 jars of peaches hidden behind a sack of meal, and written a list of supplies in a hand so neat Wade stopped and stared at it for a full moment. "You keep accounts?" he asked. "Yes. For a household. For a school once, a household is smaller and less stubborn." He looked toward the yard, where a mule had just knocked over a bucket. "Depends on the household." She looked up from the ledger, and this time the smile came before she could stop it. Wade saw it. For the rest of the week their life found a rhythm. Wade left before sunrise, his boots heavy on the porch boards. Rose packed bread and cold meat for his midday meal. He returned near dusk with dust on his coat and tiredness in the lines beside his mouth. She learned the stove, the water pump, the stubborn latch on the pantry door, and the way the house groaned when the evening wind turned. At night they sat by the fire. Not side by side. Not yet, but near enough that the silence between them began to feel less like a distance and more like a bridge being built carefully in the dark. Sometimes Rose read one of her books aloud when Wade asked what it was about. He listened more closely than she expected. Sometimes Wade told her about the ranch, the creek that flooded in April, the mare that would not cross water unless another horse went first, the winter his father lost 30 head in a storm and never forgave himself for it. He did not speak of his mother often, but Rose saw her everywhere. In the blue pitcher on the shelf, in the worn quilt folded at the foot of Wade's bedroll near the stove, where he insisted on sleeping until Rose felt settled upstairs. In the careful way he touched the chair by the hearth when he moved it, as if memory could bruise. One evening, Rose found a small wooden box in the pantry while clearing the lower shelf. It was tucked behind an old flour sack, covered in dust. She opened it only because a mouse had chewed one corner and she feared food had been hidden inside. There was no food. There was a faded ribbon, a folded recipe written in a woman's hand, and a letter sealed but never sent. Rose closed the box quickly. When Wade came in, she told him at once. "I found something that belongs to your mother." He stopped in the doorway, one hand still on the latch. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. "Where?" "In the pantry. I did not read the letter." He crossed the room slowly. When she handed him the box, his fingers brushed hers. His hand was cold from the evening air. He looked down at the faded ribbon. "My father put her things away after she passed," he said quietly. "I thought he burned most of it." Rose did not know what to say, so she said nothing. That seemed to be the right choice. Wade sat near the fire with the box in his lap for a long time. Rose worked quietly at the table, mending a torn cuff on his work shirt, pretending not to notice when his thumb moved over the sealed letter once, then again. At last, he placed the box on the mantel without opening the letter. "Thank you," he said, "for finding it. For not prying." Rose threaded the needle through dark cloth. A sealed letter is still a door. A person should not walk through another person's door uninvited. Wade looked at her then, with something deeper than gratitude. The next morning, Mercy Bend sent its first true test. Rose rode into town with Wade to purchase lamp oil, salt, and a length of plain cotton. She had hoped the church ceremony would satisfy people's curiosity. Instead, it had sharpened it. At the dry goods store, the bell above the door rang as she entered, and 3 women turned. Their conversation stopped. Ada Pike, the storekeeper's sister, stood behind the counter with pins in her mouth and judgment in her eyes. She removed the pins slowly. "Well," Ada said, "Mrs. Harlan has come to call." Rose held her list in one hand. "I have come to purchase cotton." The women exchanged looks. Ada smiled. Of course, city ladies are always very busy. Rose felt Wade behind her, but he had paused near the door speaking to the storekeeper. He did not hear. Or perhaps he did, and she could not tell. Ada leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Mrs. Harlan, do you plan to join the Women's Aid Circle this month, or are our little country efforts beneath you?" The store went still. Rose's face remained calm, but her hand tightened around the list. "I never said they were beneath me." "No," Ada said sweetly, "you would be too proper for that." Heat rose under Rose's collar. For one sharp second she wanted to answer with all the truth her tongue carried. That Ada Pike knew nothing about her. That quiet was not pride. That being different was not the same as being cruel. But then she saw Wade turn from the door. And because she did not yet know whether he would stand beside her or only hope the moment passed, Rose lowered her list to the counter and said quietly, 3 yards of cotton, please." Ada's smile deepened, thinking she had won. Wade's eyes moved from Ada to Rose, then to Rose's white fingers gripping the paper. He said nothing. Not then. But on the ride home, the space between them felt colder than the wind, and Rose understood with a sinking heart that whispers were easier to bear than uncertainty. Because a town's judgment could wound a woman, but a husband's silence could make her wonder whether she had come all this way, only to be alone in a different house. Rose did not speak during the ride back to Harlan Ranch. The wagon wheels rolled over the dry road with a slow, steady complaint. Dust lifted behind them and drifted away over the grass. The parcels from the dry goods store sat between her boots, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. 3 yards of cotton, lamp oil, salt, small ordinary things that had somehow come home with the weight of humiliation. Wade held the reins, his face turned toward the road. Rose kept her gaze on the mountains. She told herself not to make too much of it. Wade had not joined Ada Pike in cruelty. He had not agreed. He had not laughed. He had not even looked embarrassed by Rose. But he had said nothing. And silence, she was learning, could wear many faces. At the ranch, Wade pulled the wagon to a stop near the porch and climbed down. Rose reached for the parcels before he could help. One slipped from her hand and struck the step. The paper tore. Salt spilled in a white streak across the porch boards. Wade bent at once. "I'll get it." "I have it." Her voice came sharper than she intended. His hand stopped above the torn sack. Rose closed her eyes briefly, ashamed of the tone but not of the hurt beneath it. Then she knelt and began gathering what could be saved. Wade knelt across from her. For a moment they worked in silence, two people on opposite sides of a little white spill that looked foolishly like snow in the heat. "I heard her," Wade said. Rose's fingers stilled. She did not look up. "I know. I should have said something." "Yes." The word was small, but it landed hard. Wade drew a slow breath. "I was trying not to make it worse." Rose looked at him then. The afternoon sun cut across his face, showing the dust in the lines beside his mouth and the tiredness in his eyes. He looked honest. That made it harder, not easier. "For whom?" she asked. He had no quick answer. The question stayed between them. Rose gathered the torn paper and stood. "I know you are respected here, Wade. I know this town has known you your whole life. I know a new wife from St. Louis is not worth causing trouble over in a dry goods store. That is not what I think. But it is what you did." His jaw worked once. She turned before her face could soften. She carried the parcels inside, set them on the table, and began putting things away with more care than necessary. The salt went into a jar. The cotton went into the sewing basket. The lamp oil went on the shelf. Every movement was neat. Every movement kept her hands from trembling. Wade stood in the doorway. "I am not good at public quarrels," he said. Rose shut the pantry door. "Neither am I." "You looked like you handled it." "That is not the same as handling it." He looked down. For the first time since she had met him, Wade Harlan seemed uncertain in his own house. Rose wished that did not matter to her. She wished she had remained as sensible as she had been when answering his letters. A woman should not build her peace on a man's courage. She knew that. She believed that. But marriage, even a practical one, had a way of making another person's choices reach places they had no right to reach. That evening, supper was quiet. Not their usual quiet, full and easy, but a thin quiet that made the scrape of each fork sound like judgment. Wade ate what she set before him and thanked her. Rose nodded. Outside, the red mare knocked softly against the fence rail. A moth circled the lamp and tapped the glass again and again. After the dishes were done, Wade went to the barn. Rose stayed inside and opened the ledger. Numbers steadied her. Columns did not whisper. Figures did not decide a woman was proud because she stood straight or cold because she saved her words. She dipped the pen, checked Wade's feed receipts, and began adding expenses from the month. It did not take long to find another mistake. She stared at the page. At first she thought it was only a small matter of poor addition. Then she turned back through older receipts and saw the same name again. Pike and Granger Feed Supply. A charge for 2 extra sacks in June. A miswritten weight in July. A delivery fee added twice in August. Each mistake was small enough to be excused. Together they formed a pattern. Rose sat back slowly. Ada Pike's brother-in-law ran half the supply accounts in Mercy Bend. The same woman who had smiled at Rose across the counter that morning came from a family whose books were quietly bleeding money from Wade's ranch. For a moment Rose only listened to the house, the stove settling, the wind at the window, Wade moving somewhere outside with the horses. She could tell him. She should tell him. But the thought of being seen as a difficult woman again, a woman who arrived from the city and immediately accused local people of dishonesty, made her hand tighten around the pen. She went through the receipts twice more. By the time Wade returned, she had a neat page of figures laid beside the ledger. He removed his hat at the door and hung it on the peg. "You found something." It was not a question. Rose looked up, possibly. He came closer, but not too close. There was care in the distance he left between them. She turned the ledger toward him. "Your feed supplier has overcharged you 3 times since June, perhaps longer, but I have only checked what is here." Wade leaned over the table. His eyes moved slowly across her figures. Rose waited for disbelief, irritation, a wounded pride. Instead, his face darkened with focus. "How much?" "Enough to matter, not enough in each instance to invite suspicion." That usually means enough to invite suspicion. She looked at him. His gaze stayed on the ledger. "My father used to say a man who steals a spoon once may be hungry. A man who steals 1 spoon every week is counting on you being too polite to open the drawer." Rose almost smiled, almost. Wade looked at her then. "You did good work finding this." The simple praise struck her harder than she expected. She lowered her eyes to the ledger. "I only followed the numbers." "Most people don't." A quiet passed. Then he said, "I will ride into town tomorrow and speak to Granger." Rose's shoulders tightened. "Please do not say I found it." Wade studied her. "Why?" "You know why." The fire behind him had burned low. Its light moved over his face, making him look older for a moment. "Because of Ada." "Because of everyone," Rose said. "If you take my figures into town, they will not hear arithmetic. They will hear accusation. They will say I have been here less than 2 weeks and already think myself fit to correct Mercy Bend." "But the figures are true." "Yes," she gave a tired breath. "Truth does not always arrive dressed in a way people like." Something in his expression changed. It was the same look he had worn outside when she asked, "For whom?" He pulled out the chair across from her and sat. "You should not have to hide useful truth to make this town comfortable," he said. Rose looked at him carefully. The words were right. The man saying them meant them, but meaning something by firelight and carrying it into town were not the same thing. "I agree," she said, "but I have lived long enough to know should is not the same as will." Wade accepted that without defense. She appreciated him for it, though she did not say so. The next morning, he rode to Mercy Bend with the ledger page folded inside his coat. Rose watched him from the porch until the dust behind his horse faded. All day she worked with a strange tightness in her chest. She scrubbed the table. She washed linens. She mended the tear in the salt sack. She took ashes from the stove and carried them out back. She tried not to imagine every possible version of what might be happening in town. By late afternoon, clouds gathered over the mountains. Wade returned near dusk. Rose heard his horse before she saw him. She stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. His face told her nothing as he dismounted. That was the trouble with a quiet man. His silence could be calm, anger, weariness, or restraint, and she was still learning the difference. "Well?" she asked. He tied the horse and came up the steps. Granger paid back the overcharge. Rose let out a breath she had not meant to hold. And he said it was a clerical mistake. Was it? No. The porch boards creaked beneath Wade's boots as he stopped in front of her. Ada was there, he said. Rose's fingers curled into the apron. She said some people arrive in town, looking for reasons to find fault. Rose looked away. Wade's voice lowered. I told her the figures were mine. Her gaze snapped back to his. He held her eyes. I told her I had asked my wife to put my accounts in order because she had a better head for numbers than any man I knew. I told Granger if another mistake appeared, I would take my business elsewhere. Then I told Ada that Mercy Bend would do well to learn the difference between pride and competence. Rose could not speak. The words seemed to move through her slowly, finding all the places the morning silence had bruised. Wade looked toward the darkening sky. I should have done better yesterday. Yes, she said softly. I did today. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, because she could not pretend and he deserved the truth, she said, Yes, you did. The first drops of rain struck the porch roof. Wade stepped past her into the house, then paused beside the door. Rose. She turned. He looked back at her, rain darkening the shoulders of his coat. I cannot promise I will always know quick enough what courage ought to look like. The rain came harder, whispering across the yard. But I can promise I am learning. Rose stood on the porch with the cool wind pressing her skirt against her legs, and for the first time since Mercy Bend had begun closing its doors around her, she felt a door inside the house open. Not wide. Not yet. But enough for warmth to show through. If this moment touched your heart, stay with the story, because Rose had not yet learned what the town would do when a woman they disliked became the one person who could expose a secret they all depended on. That night after supper, Wade built the fire higher than usual. Rose sat across from him with her sewing in her lap, but for a long while she did not sew. She watched the flames climb and settle. She listened to the rain. On the mantel, his mother's sealed letter remained unopened in the little wooden box. Wade noticed her looking at it. My mother wrote that before she died, he said quietly. Rose looked at him. To whom? I don't know. Do you want to? He stared at the box. For a long time he said nothing. Then he answered in a voice so low, it nearly disappeared beneath the rain. I think I'm afraid it was to me. The rain stayed through the night and turned the yard soft by morning. Rose woke before sunrise to the steady sound of water slipping from the porch roof. For a moment she lay still under the quilt in the upstairs room, listening to the strange house breathe around her. A loose shutter tapped once, then twice. Somewhere below, Wade moved quietly near the stove. She could hear the careful way he handled the firewood, trying not to wake her. It was a small kindness. Small kindnesses were dangerous things. They could enter a heart before a person had agreed to open the door. Rose dressed in her plain brown work dress and pinned her hair with cold fingers. When she came downstairs, Wade had coffee warming and biscuits split on the iron pan near the fire. He looked tired. Not from work, she thought, but from something older than yesterday. The little wooden box still sat on the mantel. Neither of them looked at it at first. They ate breakfast with the storm moving gray against the windows. The horses were restless in the barn. The creek beyond the lower field had risen overnight, and Wade said he would need to check the crossing before noon. Rose nodded and poured him more coffee. The silence might have been comfortable if the unopened letter had not been in the room. At last, Wade set his cup down. "My father never spoke much about my mother's last days," he said. Rose kept her hand still around her own cup. "Did you ask?" "Once. And—" He said grief was not improved by digging through ashes. That sounds like something a man says when he is afraid of what is under them. Wade looked at her then. Rose almost apologized. The words had come out too direct, even for her, but Wade did not look offended. He looked as if she had named a thing he had spent years walking around. "My father was a good man," he said. "I believe you. He was also hard. Both can be true." Wade's gaze moved to the fire. Rose waited. She had learned that Wade's thoughts did not like being chased. They came out when the room was quiet enough. "I was 15 when she died," he said. "Fever took her in 3 days. The doctor rode from Silver Junction, but by the time he arrived, there was little he could do. My father kept me out of the room near the end. Said a boy shouldn't see his mother that way." His voice remained steady, but Rose saw his hand tighten once on the table. "I was angry at him for years," Wade continued. "Then angry at myself for being angry, then too busy to be either." Rain streaked the window glass. Rose said softly, "Busy is not the same as healed." "No," Wade said, "I am starting to understand that." The words settled between them with the smell of coffee and wet earth. After breakfast, Wade took the little box from the mantel. He did not open the letter. Instead, he carried it to the table and sat with it before him like a man sitting across from a witness. Rose cleared the plates and moved to the stove. She did not crowd him. She did not ask again. But when she passed near him, Wade reached out and caught her wrist gently. The touch startled them both. His hand was warm. His grip was careful, loose enough for her to pull away if she wished. "Would you sit with me?" he asked. Rose looked at his hand, then at his face. No one had ever asked for her presence in such a plain way. Not her usefulness, not her manners, not her silence, her presence. She sat. Wade broke the seal. The paper made a dry little sound as it opened, delicate and final. His eyes moved over the first line, and whatever he read there struck him harder than a blow. Rose saw the color leave his face. He pushed the letter toward her. "I can't," he said. Rose did not touch it at once. "Are you certain?" He nodded. She picked up the letter and read. The handwriting was faded but still graceful. "My dearest Wade, if your father gives you this, then he has done the brave thing I asked of him. If he does not, then one day perhaps God will lead it back to you another way." Rose stopped. Wade closed his eyes. She continued, her voice quiet enough to be kind but clear enough not to hide from the truth. The letter did not accuse. That was the first surprise. It did not rage against Wade's father or weep dramatically over death. It was practical, tender, and full of a woman who had known time was leaving her and had chosen each word carefully. Wade's mother had written that she loved him. She had written that his quietness was not emptiness, that his habit of watching before speaking was a gift, not a flaw. She had written that he must never let the world teach him that peace was worth more than truth. She had written that Harlan men had always been praised for keeping storms from breaking, but sometimes storms needed to break cleanly so the air could clear. By the time Rose reached the last lines, Wade had bowed his head. One day, you may love someone who stands differently from what people expect. When that day comes, do not ask her to bend herself smaller so others may feel taller. Build your fire high enough that she knows where home is. Rose could not finish immediately. The rain spoke for her. Wade's mother had written those words 14 years before Rose ever stepped off the train in Mercy Bend. 14 years before Ada Pike smiled across a dry goods counter. 14 years before Wade heard whispers and struggled to choose between the smooth road and the right one. Rose lowered the letter. Wade's face was turned away, but she saw the movement in his throat. "She knew me better than I knew myself," he said. Rose folded the letter carefully, though her own fingers were not steady. Mothers often do. "My father kept it from me." "Yes. I spent years thinking she left nothing for me." Rose did not answer quickly. Some truths were too heavy to lift with quick comfort. At last she said, "Perhaps your father thought he was sparing you pain." Wade gave a low, humorless breath. "He spared me comfort instead." That was the truest thing in the room. Rose placed the letter on the table between them. "You have it now." He looked at her then, and the grief in his eyes had changed. It was still grief, but it was no longer locked in the dark alone. "Because you found it," he said. "Because your mother hid it well enough to survive a mouse and 14 years of flour dust." A startled sound escaped him. Not quite laughter, not quite sorrow, something human between the two. Rose smiled faintly. For a moment, the house felt warmer than the fire could explain. By noon, the rain eased. Wade rode out to check the flooded crossing, and Rose stayed behind to put the house in order. But her mind kept returning to the letter, to the line about not bending smaller, to the way Wade had looked when he realized his mother had left him not only love, but instruction. She wondered what kind of woman Mrs. Harlan had been. She wondered if Mercy Bend had ever judged her, too. That afternoon brought another visitor. Rose saw the buggy first from the kitchen window. It came slowly up the muddy road, wheels cutting deep tracks, horse tossing its head against the damp air. A woman in a gray bonnet sat stiffly on the seat. Eliza Crowell, the minister's wife. Rose dried her hands on a towel and went to the door. Mrs. Crowell stepped down before Rose could offer help. Her eyes swept the porch, Rose's apron, the yard, the house behind her. Not unkindly exactly, but measuring, always measuring. "Mrs. Harlan," she said. "Mrs. Crowell. I was passing near this way." Rose looked at the road, which led nowhere near anywhere Mrs. Crowell would normally pass. "I see," Rose said. The older woman's smile tightened. "I thought I might invite you again to the Women's Aid Circle. We meet tomorrow afternoon." "That is kind of you. It would be good for you to attend." Rose knew that tone. It was the tone of advice dressed as charity. "I will consider it." Mrs. Crowell stepped closer, lowering her voice as if sharing wisdom. "A woman in your position must take care, Mrs. Harlan. Mercy Bend is a good town, but good towns are built on harmony. It is better not to appear too proud." Rose felt the word strike, but she did not move. Behind her, the fire crackled softly inside the house. "Is that what I appear?" she asked. Mrs. Crowell looked uncomfortable, as people often did when asked to stand beside their own meaning. "Some have said so. Some. Well, people talk." "Yes," Rose said, "I have noticed." Mrs. Crowell's face flushed. "I only mean to help you." Rose thought of Wade's mother. Do not ask her to bend herself smaller so others may feel taller. She folded her hands in front of her apron. Then help me honestly, Rose said. Do you want me at the aid circle because I am welcome or because you think I need correcting? The question changed the air. Mrs. Crowell stared at her. Rose's heart beat hard, but her voice remained calm. I can learn a town's customs. I cannot become false to make people comfortable. If that is required, then I will disappoint you. For a long moment, only the dripping Eve spoke. Then Mrs. Crowell drew herself up. You are very direct. I have been told. It may cost you friends. It already has. Something flickered in the minister's wife's face then. Not agreement, not even kindness, but perhaps the first small crack in certainty. Before she could answer, hoofbeats sounded from the road. Wade rode into the yard, rain dark on his hat brim, mud on his boots, and concern already sharp in his eyes when he saw the buggy. He dismounted and came toward the porch. Mrs. Crowell, he said. Mr. Harlan. Wade looked from her to Rose. He did not know what had been said, but he seemed to understand enough. Mrs. Crowell adjusted her gloves. I invited your wife to the Women's Aid Circle. Wade stepped onto the porch beside Rose. Not in front of her. Beside her. That will be her choice, he said. Mrs. Crowell's mouth tightened again. Of course. She is not a child needing instruction. Rose looked at him. The words were calm, no anger, no raised voice, but they had weight. Mrs. Crowell gave a stiff nod. I meant no offense. Then none needs to be carried away, Wade said. But Rose is my wife. If Mercy Bend wants to know her, it can begin by not treating her like a problem to solve. Rose felt the porch beneath her feet, the damp wind on her face, the quiet strength of him at her side. Mrs. Crowell did not answer. She climbed back into her buggy with careful dignity and turned the horse toward town. Only when she was gone did Wade remove his hat. I missed part of that, he said. You arrived for the important part. He looked at her uncertain. Did I speak too much? Rose thought about yesterday's silence, about the ledger, about the letter, about his mother's words finding him at last. No, she said, you spoke exactly enough. Wade's shoulders eased. Then Rose surprised herself by reaching for his hand. It was only a brief touch, her fingers over his, light as a question, but Wade went very still, as if the whole world had narrowed to that one small place where she had chosen contact. Rose withdrew first, cheeks warming. I should start supper, she said. Wade watched her with a softness he did not try to hide quickly enough. Yes, he said, I should tend the horses. But neither of them moved for another breath. That evening, while the wet prairie darkened outside, Wade placed his mother's letter back in the wooden box, not hidden in the pantry, not shut away behind flour and dust. He set it on the mantel where the firelight could reach it. Rose noticed. He noticed her noticing. Then, without speaking, he moved her chair a little closer to his. Not much. Just enough to say what he was not yet ready to put into words. And Rose, who had crossed miles of rail and judgment to reach this house, sat down by the fire and let the warmth come nearer. The Women's Aid Circle met in the back room of the Mercy Bend Church, where the windows stuck in summer and the stove smoked in winter. Rose arrived on Thursday afternoon with a basket over one arm and a calm face she had practiced only once in the small mirror above the washstand. She had not wanted to practice it twice. Twice would have felt like fear. Inside the church hall, 8 women sat around 2 long tables covered in cotton scraps, thread, jars of buttons, and half-finished quilts meant for families who had lost cattle, crops, or courage to the hard years. The room smelled of starch, coffee, and old hymn books. Conversation stopped when Rose entered. It did not fade, it stopped. Eliza Crowell looked up first. Her expression moved through surprise, caution, and something like responsibility. Ada Pike sat near the far table with a needle in her hand and a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Well," Ada said, "Mrs. Harlan decided to join us after all." Rose set her basket on the table. "I said I would consider it." "And did you consider us worthy?" Ada asked. A few women looked down quickly at their sewing. Rose removed her gloves finger by finger. "I considered the quilts worthy." The room went still again, but this time the silence had a different shape. One woman near the window pressed her lips together, hiding a smile. Ada's needle paused. Eliza cleared her throat. "We are working on winter coverlets for the Miller family. Their roof failed in the last storm." Rose took the chair offered to her. "Then I am glad I came." She lifted a square of faded blue cloth and examined the stitching already begun. It was uneven, but strong. Her fingers moved with careful certainty as she threaded her needle. Sewing had never been her favorite task, but she did it well because she did most things well once she decided they needed doing. For several minutes, the room settled back into guarded motion. The women spoke over her rather than to her at first. They talked about church repairs, a child with fever, the price of sugar, a preacher visiting from Silver Junction. Rose listened. She had learned there was a kind of power in listening. People revealed more when they believed you had nothing to say. Then Mrs. Lottie Vane, a round-faced widow with kind eyes and nervous hands, leaned toward Rose. "Mrs. Harlan, I heard you kept accounts before coming here." Rose looked up. "Yes. My husband kept ours. Since he passed, I have done my best, but numbers move around on me when I am tired." "They do not move," Ada said from the end of the table. "You just don't pin them down right." Lottie flushed. Rose looked at the paper near Lottie's sewing basket. It was folded many times, worn soft at the edges. "If you like," Rose said, "I can look at them with you after we finish." Lottie's relief was immediate and almost painful to see. "Would you?" "Yes." Ada made a small sound. "Careful, Lottie. She may find your whole life arranged incorrectly." Rose kept her eyes on her needle. "Only if it is." The woman by the window laughed before she could stop herself. Ada's cheeks colored. Eliza looked at Rose for a long moment, and this time there was no correction in her gaze, only study. The afternoon moved slowly but not badly. Rose did not become warm in the way Mercy Bend liked. She did not chatter. She did not pretend to be enchanted by every story. But when a thread tangled, she untangled it. When a pattern was miscounted, she corrected it softly. When Lottie pricked her finger and tried to hide the blood spot on the cloth, Rose quietly exchanged the square for another without making a fuss. Small kindnesses, Rose knew, were not less real because they were quiet. By the time the coffee was poured, 2 women had asked her questions directly. Not friendly questions exactly, but questions. That was a beginning. Rose sat beside Lottie near the back window and looked over the folded account page while the others cleaned up. Lottie's husband had left debts smaller than she feared, though the payment dates had tangled into a knot. Rose drew a simple column on a scrap of paper and showed her how to separate what was owed from what was due first. "You make it look plain," Lottie whispered. "It is plain once someone stops making you feel foolish for asking." Lottie looked at her with sudden wetness in her eyes. Rose lowered her voice. "You are not foolish." Across the room, Eliza Crowell heard that. Rose saw her hear it. For the first time since Rose had arrived in Mercy Bend, the minister's wife looked ashamed. Outside, the afternoon light had turned white and hot by the time the women began leaving. Rose gathered her basket and stepped onto the church porch. She had nearly reached the steps when Ada Pike followed her out. "Mrs. Harlan." Rose turned. Ada stood with her arms folded. The street behind her shimmered with heat. A wagon rattled past, and a boy led 2 mules toward the trough. "You have a sharp way of speaking," Ada said. Rose looked at her. "So do you." Ada's mouth tightened. "Mine is known here. Mine is becoming known." For a second, Ada looked as if she might laugh or snap. She did neither. "I suppose Wade finds it charming," she said. Rose felt the words for what they were. Not curiosity, not even judgment, something closer to envy hidden under scorn. "Wade finds me honest," Rose said. Ada's eyes flickered. "And I find him fair," Rose continued. "That seems enough for a marriage to begin with." Ada looked down the street toward the feed office, then back at Rose. "Fair men can still be made fools of." Rose stilled. There it was, something beneath the town gossip, something with teeth. "Is that a warning?" Rose asked. Ada's face closed. "It is advice." Those are often the same thing when people are afraid to speak clearly. Ada stepped closer. "You think because you found one mistake in a feed bill, you know this town." "No," Rose said, "but I know ledgers." The church door opened behind them. Eliza Crowell stepped out, and Ada immediately changed her expression. Rose saw it. Eliza glanced between them. "Is everything all right?" "Perfectly," Ada said. Rose did not answer. On the ride home, Rose turned Ada's words over in her mind until they became less like an insult and more like a clue. Fair men can still be made fools of. By whom? That evening, Wade came home late from the south pasture, carrying the weariness of a day spent under a hard sun. His shirt was dusted pale, his hat brim stained with sweat, and there was a shallow cut across the back of one hand where wire had caught him. Rose noticed before he said anything. "Sit," she said. He looked at the table. "Supper first." "Hand first." Something soft passed over his face. "Yes, ma'am." She brought clean water, a strip of cloth, and the small brown bottle of carbolic she had found on the pantry shelf. Wade sat at the table, large and quiet, while she cleaned the cut. His hand rested in her palm. The roughness of it reminded her of fence posts, reins, axe handles, and all the work he carried without complaint. "This will sting," she said. "I've had worse." "That is not an answer." His mouth almost smiled. "Then yes, I expect it will." She poured the carbolic. His fingers twitched once but did not pull away. Rose wrapped the cloth around his hand carefully. "You should wear gloves when mending wire." "I do." "Better gloves." "I will put that in the ledger under wife's orders." She tied the cloth and looked up. "Under sensible expenses." This time he did smile. It changed his whole face when he allowed it. The tiredness remained, but warmth came through it like light through a curtain. Rose looked away first. Wade did not move his hand from hers immediately. "How was the aid circle?" he asked. "Informative." "That sounds dangerous." "It may be." His smile faded. Rose released his hand and went to the shelf where she had placed her basket. From inside, she took the scrap of paper where she had written Lottie Vane's debts and the name she had seen at the bottom of 2 notes. Pike and Granger. Wade looked at the paper. Rose said, "Ada Pike spoke to me after the meeting." "I'm sorry." "Do not be yet. She said fair men can still be made fools of." Wade's eyes narrowed slightly. "She was talking about you," Rose said, "and I do not think she meant only the feed bill." Outside, the wind pushed dust against the window. Wade leaned back in his chair. "Pike and Granger handle more than feed. They hold notes for half the ranchers along the creek." "Including you." "Not anymore. My father borrowed once during the drought years ago, paid it off before he died." "Are you certain?" He looked at her sharply. Rose did not flinch. "I am not accusing, I am asking." Wade stood and crossed to the old desk near the parlor wall. He opened the lower drawer and removed a tin box filled with folded papers. Deeds, receipts, contracts, tax notices, yellowed with age and ordered only by whatever system Wade had inherited from his father. Rose came to stand beside him. Together they searched. At first they found nothing. Then, near the bottom, beneath a stack of cattle sale records from 5 years earlier, Rose pulled free a paper folded into thirds and tied with black thread. The name Pike and Granger appeared across the top. Wade took it from her slowly. "This is not paid," Rose said, reading over his arm. "It should be." The note was old, not large enough to threaten the ranch by itself, but large enough with interest to become a rope around a man's throat if someone chose the right moment to pull. Wade's face hardened. "My father told me this was settled." Maybe he believed it was. Or maybe someone let him believe it. The fire popped behind them. Rose reached for the next folded sheet. There, tucked inside the note, was a second paper, smaller, newer, written in a hand Rose did not recognize. Wade read it first. His expression changed so suddenly that fear moved through her. "What is it?" she asked. He handed it to her. The message was only 2 lines. "If Harlan will not sell the west pasture before winter, press the old note. His new wife will make him easier to corner. A proud woman always gives a town the rope." Rose felt the blood leave her face. For a moment the room seemed to tilt around her. The gossip, the cold welcomes, Ada's sweet cruelty, the feed overcharges, the warnings dressed as advice. It had not all been ordinary town judgment. Some of it had been guided, fed, used. Someone wanted the west pasture. And Rose, with her straight back and city ways, had been chosen as the weak place in Wade Harlan's life, before she had even known she belonged there. Wade took the note from her hand. His voice was low and controlled. "This was in my father's papers." Rose looked at him. "Who wrote it?" "I don't know." But his eyes had already moved toward the window, past the dark yard, toward Mercy Bend. Rose followed his gaze. In town, lamps would be lighting behind glass. Women would be setting supper on tables. Men would be closing shops and counting money. Somewhere among them, someone had looked at Wade's quiet nature and her lonely arrival and decided both could be used. Wade turned back to her. "I should burn this," he said. "No." The word came out quickly. He looked at her. Rose took the paper again, her hand steadier now because anger had begun to replace fear. "No," she repeated. "You should keep it. You should keep every paper, every receipt, every overcharge, every old note. People can dismiss a woman's manner. They can question her warmth. They can call her proud until the word loses shape." She laid the note flat on the desk. "But numbers and ink do not blush, Wade. They do not get embarrassed. They do not walk home in the dark. They only tell what happened." Wade stared at her, and something in his face deepened. "Tell me in the comments, would you have trusted Rose's sharp eyes in that moment, or would you have feared the trouble her truth was about to bring?" Before either of them could speak again, a sound came from outside. Not thunder. Not wind. A horse. Then another. Wade moved to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see. Rose stood very still behind him. 2 riders had stopped near the gate. One carried a lantern. The other sat tall in the saddle, his face hidden under a pale hat. Wade's hand tightened around the curtain. Rose whispered, "Who is it?" He let the curtain fall. "Jonas Pike," he said. "Ada's brother." And in Wade's voice, Rose heard what he had not yet said. The man at the gate was not there to visit. He had come for the old note. Wade did not reach for a rifle. That was the first thing Rose noticed. He stood at the window with the curtain fallen back into place, his shoulders still, his jaw tight and his hands empty. Outside, the horses shifted near the gate, their shapes dark against the lantern glow. Rainwater still dripped from the porch roof, though the storm had passed hours ago, and the whole yard smelled of wet earth and trouble. Rose looked at the paper on the desk. The old note, the hidden message, Pike and Granger written across the top like a quiet threat. "Do you want me to go upstairs?" she asked. Wade turned toward her. "No." The answer came too fast to be politeness. Rose held his gaze. He drew a breath and softened his voice. "No, Rose. This concerns you because they meant for it to concern you. I will not send you away from the truth." Something inside her steadied. The knock came then. 3 heavy strikes on the front door. Wade crossed the room, but before he opened it, he looked back at her. Not for permission, not for approval, for partnership. Rose stepped beside the desk and placed one hand lightly on the ledger. Wade opened the door. Jonas Pike stood on the porch with a wet hat brim, a long gray coat, and the calm expression of a man who had practiced looking reasonable while doing unreasonable things. Beside him stood a thinner man Rose did not know, carrying a leather case under one arm. The lantern between them threw sharp light over their faces. "Evening, Wade," Jonas said. "Jonas's eyes moved past him into the room, settling on Rose for half a second longer than courtesy allowed. "Mrs. Harlan." Rose gave him a polite nod. "Mr. Pike." His smile carried no warmth. "Forgive the late hour. Business does not always wait for daylight." "Honest business usually can," Rose said. The thin man's eyes flicked toward Jonas. Wade did not smile, but Rose saw the corner of his mouth move as if he had nearly done so. Jonas stepped forward. Wade did not move out of the doorway. "What business?" Wade asked. Jonas's expression shifted with practiced patience. "Old accounts. My partner and I have been reviewing several notes from years past. It seems your father left one unsettled." "Is that right?" "You know it is. I imagine you found the paper by now." The room seemed to tighten. Rose felt the ledger beneath her palm. Wade leaned one shoulder against the doorframe, a plain, steady posture that somehow made him look larger. "Why would you imagine that?" Jonas's gaze slid again toward Rose. "Your wife has a reputation for looking where others might leave well enough alone." Rose felt the insult, but she also heard the mistake. Jonas was too sure of himself, too eager to let her know he had been watching. Wade heard it too. "My wife found what was hidden," Wade said. "That is not the same as looking where she had no right." Jonas's smile thinned. "Rights are exactly what we need to discuss." He opened his coat and withdrew a folded paper. The thin man beside him took out a pencil and small notebook, like a clerk preparing to record a hanging of numbers instead of a man. "The note is valid," Jonas said. "Principal, interest, and delayed fees bring the total high enough that Pike and Granger can demand payment in full by month's end." Wade's face remained unreadable. Rose knew enough now to admire that silence and fear it at the same time. Jonas continued, "Of course, no one wants unpleasantness. Your west pasture borders land we already hold access to. Sell that section to us at a fair price and the old debt disappears. Clean and simple." "There it is," Wade said quietly. Jonas lifted his brows. "There what is?" "The reason." A faint irritation showed in Jonas's eyes. "The reason is your father's debt." "No," Wade said. "The reason is my land." The lantern flame bent in the damp wind. Jonas's tone hardened. "Careful, Wade. Sentiment has ruined better men than you." Rose watched Wade's hand. It hung at his side, still empty, but not weak. There was strength in a man who did not need to reach for force to show he would not be moved. She stepped forward before Jonas could continue. "May I see your calculation?" she asked. Jonas looked at her, with the kind of surprise men showed when a chair spoke. "I beg your pardon." "The calculation," Rose said. "You named principal, interest, and delayed fees. I would like to see how you arrived at the sum." The thin man gave a small cough. Jonas did not look at him. "This is legal business, Mrs. Harlan." "Then it should be written clearly." "It is not a kitchen account." "No," Rose said. "Kitchen accounts are often more honest. Fewer men expect women to read them." The clerk's mouth opened slightly. Wade turned his head enough that Rose could see his profile. Pride, quiet and unmistakable, touched his face. Jonas stepped closer to the threshold. "Your wife speaks boldly for someone new to this county." Wade's voice dropped. "My wife speaks in my house." Jonas stopped. The words were not loud, but they struck the porch like a hammer into a post. For a moment, no one moved. Then Jonas folded the paper again. "You have until the last day of the month. After that, we press the note through Judge Bellamy." "Judge Bellamy is your cousin," Rose said. Jonas looked at her. "He is the county judge." "Both can be true." Wade's mother's letter sat on the mantel behind her, close to the firelight. Rose thought of the words. Sometimes storms needed to break cleanly so the air could clear. Jonas put his hat back on. "You should teach your wife caution, Wade." Wade stepped onto the porch. The movement was slow, quiet, but Jonas instinctively shifted back. "I will not teach her to be smaller," Wade said, "and I will not sell the West pasture." The clerk swallowed. Jonas stared at Wade, anger now plain under his polished calm. "Then your wife may learn what it costs when a town turns cold." Rose came to the doorway. Wade did not move in front of her. He stood beside her, as he had on the porch with Mrs. Crowell. Rose looked straight at Jonas Pike. "I was cold before I came here," she said. "I survived it." Jonas had no answer for that. He turned sharply, climbed onto his horse, and motioned to the clerk. A moment later, the two riders moved down the muddy road, the lantern swinging until its light disappeared beyond the bend. Wade remained on the porch until the sound of hooves faded. Rose stood beside him, feeling the night press close around the house. The stars had begun to appear where the storm clouds had broken, hard and bright above the dark valley. At last, Wade said, "You should not have had to face that." "I did not face it alone." He looked at her. The truth of her own words startled her. She had spent years training herself not to need rescue, not to hope for defense, not to expect anyone to understand the cost of being misread. Yet here she stood, on a wet porch in Colorado, beside a man who had chosen not to silence her even when her words sharpened the danger. Inside, the fire popped. Wade took off his hat and held it in both hands. "My father should have told me about the note." Perhaps he meant to. Perhaps. Rose heard the wound beneath the word. They went back inside. Wade shut the door and slid the bolt. The sound felt final. But nothing was final. Not the old debt, not the town's judgment, not the strange, quiet feeling growing between them like a fire that had finally found dry wood. For the next 3 days, Mercy Bend changed its manner toward Rose. The town had always been watchful. Now it became deliberate. At the mercantile, Mr. Granger told her they were out of lamp oil, while 3 full bottles stood on the shelf behind him. At the post office, her letter from St. Louis sat unopened on the counter until she asked for it by name. 2 women crossed the street rather than pass near her. Children who had once stared with curiosity now stared because they had heard their mothers speak. Rose did not tell Wade everything. Not because she feared his response, because she feared what each new insult would do to him. Wade had spent his life being the reasonable man in Mercy Bend, the fair man, the one people trusted to settle fence lines and church repairs and cattle disputes. Now, because he had married her and refused Pike's offer, that place in town was beginning to crack beneath him. She could bear their coldness toward herself. She found it harder to bear what she was costing him. On Saturday morning, Wade discovered that 3 sections of fence along the west pasture had been cut. He rode in near noon, anger held so tightly in him that even the horses seemed careful around it. Rose was kneading bread when he entered. His coat was dusty, his gloves dark with mud, and a broken piece of fence wire hung from his hand. She looked at the wire, then at his face. "Cattle?" she asked. "Lost 7 into the ridge wash. Found 5, 2 still missing." "Cut." He dropped the wire on the table, clean. Rose wiped flour from her hands. "Pike." "I cannot prove it." "That was not my question." Wade looked toward the window. "Yes." For a moment, the kitchen filled with a silence so hard it seemed to press against Rose's ribs. Then Wade said, "I am going to town." Rose stepped closer. "For what?" "To speak with him." "How?" The question stopped him. His eyes came back to hers, plainly. Plainly can become dangerously close to angrily when a man has lost cattle. "I won't be foolish." "I know," she looked at the broken wire. "But he wants you angry. He wants you to look unreasonable. That is why he came here at night. That is why he mentioned the town. That is why the fence was cut where you would find it before Sunday." Wade's brow tightened. Rose saw the moment he understood. "If I confront him without proof," he said, "he becomes the wronged businessman. And you become the stubborn rancher with a difficult wife." Wade looked at her for a long time. "Difficult," he said quietly, "has become one of my favorite words." Rose felt warmth rise in her cheeks. It was not a confession, not close, but it touched something tender all the same. She looked down first. "We need proof." He nodded slowly. "How?" Rose turned to the desk where they had stacked the papers. "We begin where dishonest men are most confident. With money. With old paper." That afternoon they spread every deed, receipt, note, and account across the kitchen table. Outside, the wind dragged clouds over the mountains. Inside, Rose sorted by date while Wade read names aloud. Pike and Granger appeared too often, on feed bills, on land transfers, on debt notes, on witness lines. Small marks in the corners, similar ink, similar phrasing. By evening, Rose found the first true crack. A payment receipt from Wade's father. 16 years old. Folded into a cattle sale record where no one had thought to look. Her heart began to beat faster. "Wade." He looked up from the far side of the table. She held out the receipt. "Your father paid the note." Wade crossed the room so quickly his chair scraped hard against the floor. "He took the paper." His eyes moved over the faded ink once, twice, then his face changed. It was not relief. Not yet. It was grief. The receipt showed the amount, the date, and the signature of Silas Granger, Jonas Pike's former partner. The debt had been settled 2 months before Wade's father died. Wade sat down slowly. "He told me," he whispered. Rose understood. His father had told him the truth. Wade had doubted him for 3 days because hidden paper had made the dead look careless. She placed a hand on the back of his chair, not touching him but near enough. "Your father paid it," she said gently. Wade bowed his head. For a moment, he was not the strong rancher Mercy Bend knew. He was a son sitting in firelight with one more piece of his past, returned to him too late to say he was sorry. Rose's chest ached for him. She let the quiet stand. Then she noticed something else. On the receipt beside Silas Granger's signature there was a witness mark. Not a full name, just initials written in a narrow hand. "I see." Rose picked up the paper again. "Wade," she said slowly, "who else in town has those initials?" He looked up. Neither of them spoke the name at first. They did not need to. Eliza Crowell, the minister's wife, the woman who had come to Rose's porch with advice about harmony, the woman who had looked ashamed when Rose helped Lottie Vane, the woman who had heard more than she admitted and said less than she knew. Subscribe for more romantic Wild West stories where love, pain, and truth meet on the frontier, because this town's secret was no longer only about land. It was about the people who had stayed silent while one family was cornered. The next morning was Sunday. Mercy Bend gathered at church under a pale sky, all clean collars, pinned hats, polished boots, and careful faces. Rose walked in beside Wade with the old receipt folded inside her Bible. People turned. Ada Pike looked at her from the second pew. Jonas Pike stood near the front, speaking quietly to Judge Bellamy. Eliza Crowell sat beside the minister, hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Rose felt Wade beside her, steady as a fence post set deep. They took their pew. The hymns began. Rose tried to sing, but her throat felt too tight. Halfway through the second hymn, the church door opened. Lottie Vane slipped inside, face pale, bonnet crooked, breath quick as if she had been running. She looked straight at Rose. Then she lifted one trembling hand. In it was a folded paper. Ada Pike stood at once. "Lottie, sit down." But Lottie did not sit. She walked down the aisle with every eye in Mercy Bend upon her, and placed the paper in Rose's hands. "I found it in my husband's things," Lottie whispered. "It has Mr. Pike's name on it." The hymn died one voice at a time. Rose opened the paper. Wade leaned close enough to read with her. And there, in black ink, was a list of ranchers whose old paid debts had been quietly kept alive. Harlan was not the only name. Half of Mercy Bend was on the page. For one long breath, nobody inside the Mercy Bend church moved. The last note of the hymn seemed to hang in the rafters like smoke. Sunlight came through the tall windows in pale bars, touching clean bonnets, dark coats, folded hands, and faces that had gone stiff with surprise. Rose stood in the Harlan pew, with Lottie Vane's paper open in her hands. Wade stood beside her. Half of Mercy Bend was written on that page. Miller, Vane, Abbott, Cooper, Harlan. Names of families who had sat in this church for years, passing hymnals, sharing pies, burying loved ones, raising barns after storms. Names that had trusted Pike and Granger because a town built on handshakes wanted to believe its own men were honest. Jonas Pike broke the silence first. "That woman has no right bringing private business into the Lord's house." His voice was sharp, but Rose heard the fear under it. Ada Pike stepped out from the second pew, her face flushed. "Lottie, you poor thing, you don't know what you're holding." Lottie Vane trembled from head to foot, but she did not step back. "I know enough," she said. Her voice was small, yet in that quiet room it carried. The minister looked from his wife to Jonas Pike, then to Rose. "Mrs. Harlan, perhaps we should discuss this after service." Rose felt every eye turn toward her. There it was again. The old pressure: be polite, be smooth, do not disturb the room, do not embarrass people who have already embarrassed you, do not make truth inconvenient. Her fingers tightened around the paper. Before she could answer, Wade moved. He did not move in front of her. He did not take the paper from her hand. He simply stepped out into the aisle and turned so the room could see him clearly. "My wife will speak," he said. A murmur went through the pews. Jonas gave a short laugh. Since when does a Harlan let his new bride run county business? Wade looked at him. "Since my new bride found the truth the rest of us missed." The words struck harder than if he had shouted. Rose's breath caught. Ada's mouth opened, then closed. Wade turned his head slightly toward Rose. "Tell them." There was no command in it, only trust. Rose stepped into the aisle. Her heart beat so hard she felt it in her throat, but her voice, when it came, was steady. She had taught rooms full of restless girls in St. Louis. She had faced fathers who thought education made daughters difficult. She had endured church women who wrapped cruelty in manners. A room full of frightened townspeople was not so different. Fear made people children again, and children needed plain words. "This paper was brought to me by Mrs. Vane," Rose said. "It appears to list several debts once held by Pike and Granger." Jonah snapped, "Appears." Rose looked at him. "Yes, appears. I will use careful words until the papers prove stronger ones." A few men shifted in their seats. She continued, "Yesterday evening, Mr. Harlan and I found a receipt showing his father paid an old note in full 16 years ago. Yet that same note was presented to us this week as unpaid, with interest and fees added." Voices rose at once. "What note? Who signed it?" "My family borrowed during the drought." "Let her finish." The last voice came from the back pew. Old Benjamin Miller, whose roof the Women's Aid Circle had been quilting for, stood with both hands on his cane. "Let her finish," he repeated. The room settled uneasily. Rose unfolded Wade's receipt from inside her Bible and held it up. This receipt bears the signature of Silas Granger and the initials of a witness. Her eyes moved toward Eliza Crowell. The minister's wife had gone very pale. Rose did not say her name, not yet. "Mrs. Vane," Rose said gently, "may I ask where you found this list?" Lottie looked toward Ada Pike and swallowed. "In my husband's old account box. He died last winter and I could not bear sorting the papers. After you helped me with the numbers, I looked again. There was a false bottom under the box." Ada whispered, "Lottie." Lottie's eyes filled, but her voice grew stronger. "No, Ada, I have been afraid of bills for 6 months because men like your brother told me I was too confused to understand them. But Mrs. Harlan showed me I was not foolish. I was kept foolish." That sentence changed the room. Not all at once, but enough. Rose saw women lift their eyes. Men exchanged looks. Someone in the third pew muttered a name from the list. Another man stood halfway, then sat again as if his knees had failed. Jonas Pike stepped into the aisle. "This is hysteria," he said. "A grieving widow and a city woman with a taste for drama." Wade's voice turned cold, careful. Jonas ignored him. "These records are private, complicated, and old. Any woman can misunderstand figures if she wants to feel important." The insult landed exactly where he aimed it. Not only at Rose. At Lottie. At every woman in that church who had ever been told not to trouble her head with money. At every wife who had signed nothing but lost everything. At every widow who feared ledgers because men had made ledgers into locked doors. Eliza Crowell rose slowly from the front pew. "Jonas," she said. Her voice shook. Jonas turned on her. "Sit down, Eliza." The minister looked at his wife, stunned. "Eliza." She did not sit. Rose watched her hands. They trembled, but she clasped them once and released them, as if setting down a burden she had carried too long. "I witnessed Silas Granger's receipt," Eliza said. The church erupted. Jonas's face darkened. "You do not know what you are saying." "I know exactly what I am saying." Eliza looked at Wade then, shame softening her face. "Your father paid the note. I was present. Silas Granger asked me to witness it because the county clerk was away and your father wanted another pair of eyes. I was younger then, newly married, and I thought being asked meant I mattered." Her voice caught. Wade stood very still. Eliza continued. "After Silas died, Jonas came to me. He said the receipt had been misplaced and that if anyone asked, I should say I did not remember clearly. He said no harm would come of it. He said the Harlans were strong enough to bear a little confusion until the records were put right." Rose saw Ada Pike cover her mouth with one hand. Wade asked quietly, "Why did you not tell me?" Eliza's eyes filled. "Because by the time I understood what he was doing, years had passed, and then your father was dead, and then more names appeared, more notes, more families. I kept thinking someone else would speak first." No one did. The words did not need to be spoken aloud. They lived on every face in the church. Rose felt no triumph, only sadness. This was how wrongdoing grew in decent towns, not because everyone was cruel, but because too many people were careful, too many wanted harmony, too many waited for someone else to pay the cost of truth. Jonah's back toward the front doors. "You will regret this." Wade moved one step, but Rose put a hand on his sleeve. He stopped. She looked at Jonah's. "No, Mr. Pike, I think regret has belonged to the wrong people long enough." At that, Benjamin Miller struck his cane once against the floor. "I want my papers checked." "So do I," another man said. "And mine. My husband had a note with Granger. My brother lost pasture after the drought." Voices rose again, but this time they did not scatter into gossip. They gathered into something stronger. Judge Bellamy, Jonah's Pike's cousin, stood near the front with his face tight and unreadable. He looked as if he wanted to disappear through the floorboards. Wade turned to him. "Judge, will you take these papers and begin a review?" The judge hesitated. Every eye shifted to him. Rose saw the choice before he made it: family or law, comfort or truth, the same choice wearing a different coat. Judge Bellamy removed his spectacles, cleaned them with a cloth, and put them back on. "I will review what is brought to me," he said stiffly. "And given my relation to Mr. Pike, I will request the territorial magistrate from Silver Junction oversee the matter." Jonas cursed under his breath and pushed through the doors. Ada started after him, then stopped. For the first time since Rose had met her, Ada Pike looked unsure of where to stand. The service never properly resumed. People gathered in hard little groups. Some rushed home to search old boxes. Some surrounded Lottie with questions. Some avoided Rose's eyes, ashamed of how quickly they had judged her. Eliza Crowell stood alone near the front pew until Rose walked to her. The minister's wife looked as if she expected punishment. Rose handed her Wade's receipt. "You should keep your memory close to the paper," Rose said. "People will test both." Eliza took it with trembling fingers. "I was unkind to you." "Yes." The direct answer startled her. Rose continued, "But you told the truth today." Eliza lowered her eyes. Too late. Late truth is still better than continued silence. Tears slipped down Eliza's cheeks. She nodded, unable to speak. Outside the church, Mercy Bend no longer looked the same. The same road ran past the same stores. The same trough stood beside the hitching rail. The same dust moved in the afternoon light. But the town's face had changed because its secret had come into the sun. Wade helped Rose into the wagon. This time, people watched them with a different silence. Not acceptance. Not yet. But attention, real attention. As they drove out of town, Rose saw Ada Pike standing in the shadow of the dry goods porch. Ada's arms were folded tightly over her chest, and her face was pale. For one brief moment, their eyes met. Rose expected hatred. Instead, she saw fear. Not for Jonas. Of him. That stayed with Rose all the way home. The ranch appeared in the distance just as late afternoon turned the grass copper. Wade had not spoken much since they left town. His hands rested steady on the reins, but Rose could feel the force of everything held inside him. At last, she said, "You believed me before they did." Wade looked at the road. "I should have believed you sooner." "You did when it mattered." His mouth tightened. "It mattered at the dry goods store." Rose looked down at her folded hands. The old hurt was still there, but smaller now. Not gone. A wound did not vanish because a man learned to dress it, but it could heal if he kept his hands gentle and honest. Yes, she said, it did. I keep thinking about my mother's letter, he said, about not asking someone to bend smaller. Rose looked at him. Wade's voice grew quieter. I think I spent most of my life bending myself smaller too, not because anyone asked in words, because it was easier, because people liked me best when I did not make them uncomfortable. The horses pulled them up the rise toward home. Rose felt the truth of that settle in her chest. And now, she asked. Wade looked at her then. Now I would rather be uncomfortable with you than comfortable without you. The words were plain, almost rough, not dressed as romance, not softened by poetry. That was why they reached her so deeply. Rose turned toward the open land quickly, but Wade saw her face before she could hide it. She knew he saw by the way his voice softened when he spoke again. I did not say that to trouble you. You did not. Did I say too much? Rose let the question sit between them, warm and frightening. Then she answered honestly, No, I think you said enough to make me remember it. They reached the house near dusk. Wade tended the horses while Rose went inside to start supper, but her hands moved slowly. She sliced potatoes and nearly forgot the onions. She set a pan on the stove without oil. She opened the pantry and stood there for a full minute, staring at flour sacks while hearing his words again. I would rather be uncomfortable with you than comfortable without you. No man had ever said anything like that to her. No man had ever made discomfort sound like devotion. After supper, they sat by the fire. The room was quieter than usual, not because there was nothing to say, but because the day had said too much. Wade's mother's letter rested on the mantel. Rose looked at it. She would have been proud of you today. Wade did not answer for a long time. Then he said, I hope so. She would. His eyes lifted to hers. You cannot know that. No, Rose said, but I know what she asked of you. The firelight moved between them. Wade leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely. Rose, when I wrote to the agency, I thought I was asking for a practical wife. I know. I thought I needed someone to help with the house and accounts, someone steady, someone who would not mind quiet. That is what you asked for. It is not what I got. Rose's breath caught before she could stop it. Wade saw the flicker of hurt and shook his head at once. No, that came out wrong. She looked down. He stood, then stopped himself, as if crossing the room too quickly might frighten whatever fragile thing stood between them. What I mean is, he said carefully, I asked for help keeping my life as it was. Instead, you came here and made me see it could be truer than it was. Rose could not lift her eyes. The fire snapped softly. Wade's voice lowered. I am glad you came to Mercy Bend, Rose, even with the trouble, maybe because of what the trouble showed me. She looked up then. He was standing near the hearth, hatless, tired, honest, and more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. The same man who had faced Jonah's pike without reaching for violence now looked afraid of one woman's answer. Rose set her sewing aside. I am glad I came, she said. His face changed. Just a little. But enough. Outside, the night wind moved across the valley, bending the grass in long, dark waves. Inside, the fire burned high, throwing its warmth over two chairs that had somehow become closer than they had been before. Then a horse cried out from the barn. Wade turned sharply. Another sound followed. Wood cracking. Rose stood. What was that? Wade was already moving toward the door. Before he reached it, orange light flashed across the kitchen window. For one terrible second, Rose thought it was lightning. Then smoke rolled past the glass. Wade threw the door open. The barn was burning. The barn roof had not caught yet, but the south wall was alive with flame. Wade ran first. Rose followed before fear could find a voice inside her. Heat struck her face halfway across the yard. Smoke rolled low and black from the cracks between the boards, and inside the barn, the horses screamed in terror. "Rose, stay back," Wade shouted. She did not stop. The red mare kicked hard against her stall door. Another horse slammed into the divider, shaking the whole frame. Sparks climbed the wall like wicked fireflies. The smell of burning hay filled the night, sharp and choking. Wade reached the barn doors and pulled one open. Smoke poured over him. He coughed once, then vanished inside. Rose grabbed the water bucket near the trough and threw it against the burning wall. It did almost nothing. The flame laughed at it. Inside, Wade's voice cut through the noise. "Easy, easy, girl." Rose could barely see him. Only his shape moved in the smoke, one arm raised, leading the red mare by the halter. The animal fought him, eyes wide and white, hooves striking sparks from the packed dirt. Wade stayed close to her head, speaking low, guiding her through the black haze inch by inch. Rose ran to the pasture gate and threw it open. "Here," she called. Wade brought the mare out, then slapped the rope into Rose's hands. "Take her clear." Rose led the trembling animal into the yard, murmuring nonsense because it was the only soft thing she could give. The mare's body shook under Rose's palm. Smoke stung her eyes, but she tied the horse to the far fence and turned back. Wade was already inside again. The second horse came out wild, nearly knocking him sideways. He got hold of the bridle and dragged the animal into open air. His coat sleeve smoked near the cuff. "Your arm," Rose cried. He beat the sparks out with his gloved hand and ran back. "Wade, there's one more." The words struck her cold. The bay gelding. The quiet one Wade had said was his father's last good purchase. The horse that trusted Wade more than any other animal on the place. A beam cracked inside the barn. Rose ran to the woodpile, grabbed a heavy blanket from the chopping block where Wade used it to cover split kindling, and plunged it into the trough. Water soaked through it, dragging the weight down her arms. She hauled it up and rushed toward the doorway. Smoke swallowed her at once. Her lungs seized. "Wade," she coughed. He appeared through the haze, one hand over his mouth, the other pulling at a stall latch that had jammed. Behind the door, the bay gelding struck the boards again and again, frantic enough to break his own legs. Rose threw the wet blanket around Wade's shoulders. He looked at her in furious disbelief. "Get out." "The latch is bent." "I said get out." "No." She moved beside him, eyes streaming from the smoke. The metal latch had warped where heat touched it. Wade pulled, but it would not lift. Rose saw the problem before he did. A nail had worked loose from the stall frame and trapped the hinge plate just enough to hold. "There," she choked, pointing. Wade drove his boot against the board. Once. Twice. The third kick split the wood. The latch sprang free. The gelding burst out, shoulder striking Wade hard enough to throw him into the post. Rose grabbed his coat as he staggered. For one breath, his weight nearly took her down with him. Then he found his feet, seized her wrist, and pulled her toward the open doors. They stumbled into the yard as part of the south wall collapsed behind them. Flames roared upward. The night filled with orange. Rose fell to her knees in the mud, coughing so hard her chest burned. Wade dropped beside her, one hand still clamped around her wrist as if he feared the fire might take her even now. "You foolish woman," he rasped. Rose coughed again. "You are welcome." His grip tightened, then loosened at once. For a moment, through smoke and heat and terror, they stared at each other. His face was streaked black. Her eyes streamed. A curl had fallen loose from her pins and stuck to her cheek. Then Wade pulled her against him. It was not a careful gesture, not polite, not the slow respect they had been using like a bridge. It was fear given arms. His hand pressed against the back of her head, holding her close while the barn burned behind them. Rose froze for half a second. Then she let herself lean into him. His heart was pounding so hard, she felt it through his shirt. "You went in after me," he said against her hair, voice rough. "You went in after the horse." "That was different." "Not to the fire." A broken laugh moved through him, but it sounded too close to pain. The ranch hands from the neighboring quarter arrived within minutes, drawn by the glow. Men shouted. Buckets moved from trough to line, line to flame. Someone rode hard toward town for help. Rose worked until Wade forced her to sit on the porch, then she rose again the moment he turned away. The barn could not be saved. By midnight the flames were beaten down, leaving black ribs of wood against the sky. The horses lived. 2 cattle in the nearby pen had broken loose but were found near the creek. The south wall was gone. Half the hay burned. The tack room was ash. And near the back corner, where the first flames had climbed, Wade found the lantern. Not his lantern. A small dented lantern with a cracked red glass, half buried in mud and hay. The kind sold at Pike's dry goods store. Rose stood beside him when he lifted it. The metal was still warm. Wade's face in the dying firelight became something she had not seen before. Not anger. Anger moved too quickly. This was colder, deeper, a man reaching the end of patience. "It was set," Rose said. "Yes." "Jonah's." Wade stared at the lantern, or someone who wanted us to think Jonah's. Rose looked toward the road. The town lay beyond the dark, quiet and hidden. But in her mind she could see lamps lit behind curtains, whispers moving faster than horses, fear turning people into liars or cowards depending on what they had to lose. A rider approached just before dawn. Not from town. From the East Trail. Rose noticed first because she had stayed on the porch with Wade's burned sleeve in her lap, trying to mend what could not truly be mended. She was exhausted, her throat raw from smoke, but sleep would not come. The rider came slowly, as if uncertain whether he would be welcomed. When he reached the yard, Wade stood. It was Sheriff Amos Reed. He was a square-built man in his 50s with a gray mustache, tired eyes, and a badge that looked dull in the early light. Rose had seen him twice in Mercy Bend, always speaking mildly, always arriving after trouble had already decided what shape it wanted. Sheriff Reed dismounted and looked at the burned barn. "Lord have mercy," he said. Wade held up the lantern. "You can take mercy up with the man who said it." The sheriff's gaze moved to the lantern. His face changed just enough. Rose saw it. "You recognize it," she said. Sheriff Reed looked at her, then at Wade. "A lot of men own lanterns." "Not with red glass cracked across the corner," Rose said. Wade looked at her. She stepped down from the porch and came closer. "I saw that lantern hanging behind the counter at Pike's store 2 days ago. Ada moved it when she reached for lamp wicks." The sheriff rubbed one hand over his mouth. Wade's voice hardened. "Amos." The sheriff looked toward the ruined barn. "Jonah's Pike left town last night." Rose's heart gave one hard beat. "When?" Wade asked. "Near midnight, according to the boy at the livery. Took the South Road." Wade's eyes narrowed. "South Road leads toward the county line." "It does." "And you came here at dawn to tell me after he was gone." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "I came as soon as I heard about the fire." "That is not what I asked." For a moment the two men faced each other in the gray morning, and Rose understood that Wade's old place in Mercy Bend was cracking wider. He was no longer the man who smoothed trouble flat for everyone else. He was looking straight at a sheriff and asking why the law had moved slowly when certain men needed time. Sheriff Reed looked down. "I should have acted sooner," he said. Wade gave a short breath. "That sentence is getting popular in this town." Rose almost reached for him but stopped. The sheriff removed his hat. "I will wire Silver Junction. Pike won't get far if he stayed on the main road." "And if he did?" Wade asked. "Then I will ride." Wade stepped closer. "You will ride now." The sheriff looked at him. Rose expected anger. Instead, she saw shame. "I'll ride now," Reed said. Before he mounted, Rose spoke. "Sheriff." He turned. "If Jonas Pike fled after a barn was burned, he left something behind he was afraid we would find." The sheriff frowned. "What do you mean?" "Men run from fire when fire is the whole crime," Rose said. "They run from papers when fire was meant to destroy them." Wade looked toward the blackened barn. "The tack room," he said. Rose nodded. "You kept the copies there." Wade moved at once. The tack room had collapsed inward, but one corner still stood, smoking faintly. The men from the neighboring ranch helped pull loose boards aside. Rose searched from a distance at first, then stepped closer when she saw the corner of Wade's iron strongbox beneath a fall of charred leather. "It's there," she called. The box was hot, blackened, and dented, but when Wade dragged it free and broke the damaged latch, the papers inside were scorched only at the edges. Deeds, copies of receipts, old maps, a water right document for the West Pasture Creek, and one small envelope Wade did not recognize. No name on the front. Only a mark pressed into the wax seal. A tiny pine branch. Sheriff Reed went pale. Rose saw it before he looked away. "You know that mark?" she said. "No," he answered too quickly. Wade turned on him. "Amos." The sheriff swallowed. "It belonged to Silas Granger." "Granger is dead," Wade said. "Yes." "Then why would his seal be on a fresh envelope in my tack room?" Nobody answered. Wade broke the seal. Inside was a letter written in a cramped hand. Rose read over his shoulder, her breath still rough from smoke. "If Pike presses too hard, give Harlan the sealed proof. His father paid. So did Miller, Vane, and Abbott. I helped hide it, and God forgive me, I profited from it. Jonas has used the old notes for years to force land sales along the creek. If I die before I make this right, let the record speak." At the bottom was Silas Granger's signature, and beneath it a second line. "Copies hidden under the church floor, north vestry, beneath the hymn cabinet." Rose slowly lifted her eyes. The church. All those years, proof had rested beneath hymns and polished shoes while families lost land, while widows feared ledgers, while Wade doubted his father, while Rose was called proud for noticing what others refused to see. Wade folded the letter with shaking hands. Sheriff Reed looked as if he had aged 10 years in 1 minute. "I knew Granger confessed something before he died," the sheriff said hoarsely. "I did not know where he put it." Wade stared at him. "But you knew there was something." Reed did not deny it. The morning wind passed through the burned barn, lifting ash into the pale light. Rose stepped closer to Wade. This time she did not hesitate to take his hand. His fingers closed around hers. It was the first time they held hands in front of another man, in front of the ruin, in front of a town's shame beginning to surface. It was not soft romance. It was something stronger, a vow without a ceremony, a choice made with soot on their faces and truth in their hands. "Before the next truth comes out, let me know what you think should happen to a town that let silence protect the wrong man for too many years." By mid-morning, Mercy Bend gathered at the church again. Not for service. For reckoning. The sheriff had sent riders after Jonas Pike. Judge Bellamy had locked himself in his office to write to Silver Junction, Men came carrying old account boxes. Women came with folded receipts, letters, and fearful faces. Lottie Vane stood near Rose, no longer trembling as much. Eliza Crowell waited at the vestry door, pale but determined. Ada Pike came last. She wore no bonnet, and her hair was pinned badly as if she had dressed in haste. When she entered the church, conversation fell into a cold hush. Her brother's name sat on every tongue, though no one spoke it to her face. Rose watched Ada walk toward the front. For once, the other woman did not look proud. She looked cornered. Wade went to the north vestry with the sheriff and 2 witnesses. The hymn cabinet was moved. The floorboards were pried up one by one. Under the third board, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine, lay a packet of papers. The proof. Names, payments, copies of settled notes, land transfers made under pressure, letters between Jonas Pike and Silas Granger, later letters from Jonas alone, colder and bolder, written after Granger died and the scheme became fully his. As the papers were read aloud, Mercy Ben began to understand the size of what had been done. Benjamin Miller had not lost his lower field because of bad luck. Lottie Vane's husband had not died owing what Jonas claimed. The Abbott brothers had sold creek access they should never have lost. And Wade Harlan's west pasture had been next. Then Sheriff Reed unfolded the last paper. His voice changed when he read it. Rose felt Wade's hand tighten. The final letter named the person who had carried messages for Jonas when townspeople began watching the Pike office too closely. Not Ada. Not Judge Bellamy. Eliza Crowell gave a small cry and sank into a pew. The name on the letter was her husband, Reverend Nathaniel Crowell. The name fell inside the church like a burning beam. Reverend Nathaniel Crowell. For a moment, Mercy Ben did not understand what it had heard. People turned first toward Sheriff Reed, as if the old man had read the wrong line, then toward the paper in his hand, then, slowly, toward the front pew where Reverend Crowell stood beside his wife with one hand still resting on the back of the bench. Eliza Crowell looked at her husband as if she had been struck without a hand being raised. Nathaniel, she whispered. The Reverend's face had gone strangely calm. That frightened Rose more than a protest would have. A guilty man often denied too quickly. A practiced man waited to see how much had been proved. Sheriff Reed swallowed. The letter says Reverend Crowell carried sealed messages between Jonas Pike and Silas Granger during the drought years. Later, after Granger died, he carried notices and warnings for Jonas Pike alone. That is a lie, Reverend Crowell said. His voice was clear, deep, and sorrowful in exactly the way a preacher's voice should be. A few people shifted at the sound of it, pulled by habit toward belief. Rose saw it happen. That was power, not a gun, not money, not law, a voice people had trusted for years. Wade saw it too. His hand tightened once at his side, then relaxed. The Reverend stepped into the aisle. I have served this town faithfully. I have baptized your children, buried your dead, sat beside your sickbeds, and prayed over your tables. I will not have my name blackened by an old paper found under a church floor, written by a dead man trying to save his own soul. A murmur moved through the room. Eliza turned fully toward him. Did you carry messages? He looked at her with wounded dignity. Eliza, surely you know me better. But his answer did not answer. Rose watched Eliza's face. A woman could hear the missing word when she had lived with a man long enough. Eliza took one step back. Reverend Crowell's expression tightened. Do not let strangers turn you against your own husband. The word strangers found Rose like a thrown stone. Wade moved before she could speak. My wife is not a stranger in this church anymore, he said. The Reverend looked at him. Careful, Wade, anger can make a man unjust. So can fear, Wade answered. The church doors stood open behind them. Outside, the street had filled with more townspeople, drawn by rumor and the sight of men carrying papers into the church. Sunlight lay bright on the steps, but inside the air felt close and hot. Sheriff Reed unfolded another page from the oilcloth packet. There are payment marks beside Reverend Crowell's name. "For church repairs," the Reverend said at once. Rose looked up. "Too quick." Wade's eyes moved to her. He had heard it too. Rose stepped forward. "How did you know the marks were payments?" Reverend Crowell turned toward her slowly. The room stilled again. "I beg your pardon," he said. "The sheriff only said there were marks beside your name," Rose said. "He did not say what kind. You named them payments." A faint flush rose along the Reverend's neck. Ada Pike, standing near the back wall, closed her eyes. Rose saw that too. She looked at Ada. "You knew." Ada's eyes opened. Every face turned toward her now, and for the first time since Rose had arrived in Mercy Bend, Ada Pike looked like a woman with no sharp words left to hide behind. "I suspected," Ada said. Jonas's sister, the woman who had mocked Rose in the store, needled her at the aid circle and smiled while others whispered. Her voice now sounded thin, stripped of its usual bite. Rose asked when. Ada's mouth trembled once. She pressed it flat. "After Silas Granger died, Jonas changed. He stopped letting me handle certain invoices, locked the back cabinet, sent me out whenever Reverend Crowell came to the office." The Reverend's face hardened. "Ada." She flinched at her name, and Rose understood then why fear had sat behind Ada's eyes outside the church. It was not only fear of her brother. It was fear of all the men whose secrets she had learned to step around. Ada continued, "I told myself it was business, men's business. I told myself the ranchers who sold land must have had reasons. I told myself a great many things because telling myself was easier than asking Jonas and hearing an answer I could not live with." Lottie Vane stood near the aisle, pale but steady. "And when you treated me like a fool." Ada looked at her. "I am ashamed of it." The words were not pretty, they were not enough, but they were real. Reverend Crowell lifted his hand as if calming a congregation after a storm. "This is becoming a spectacle. Fear has made accusations run wild. I will answer proper questions before proper authorities, not before a crowd stirred up by a woman who has been here barely a season." Rose felt Wade beside her, ready to speak. This time she lifted her hand slightly. "Let me." Wade stopped. Rose turned toward the Reverend. "You are right about one thing. I have not been here long." His expression softened with the first hint of satisfaction. But sometimes a stranger sees the shape of a room, because she has not learned where she is expected not to look. The satisfaction vanished. Rose's voice stayed calm. "When I came to Mercy Bend, I was told I needed to learn harmony. I was told plain truth made people uncomfortable. I was told my silence meant pride and my speech meant trouble. But I have watched this town carefully, and I think what some people called harmony was only fear wearing church clothes." A deep quiet moved through the pews. Eliza Crowell covered her mouth. Rose looked from face to face. "If Reverend Crowell is innocent, then the papers will prove it. If he is guilty, then his good sermons do not erase the harm done to families who trusted him." The Reverend's eyes sharpened. "You speak of harm as if you understand sacrifice." Wade's voice dropped. "Do not." But Reverend Crowell pressed on, now looking at Rose with anger barely hidden beneath sorrow. "You arrive from a city, marry into a respected ranch, and within months set yourself above women who spent years holding this town together." Rose felt the old sting, but it no longer owned her. "No," she said, "I set numbers above whispers, that is all." Benjamin Miller struck his cane once, and numbers are more than we had before. A man near the door called out, read the rest. Yes, another said, read it all. The pressure in the room shifted away from Rose and toward the papers. Sheriff Reed looked to Judge Bellamy, who stood near the pulpit, red-faced and shaken. The judge nodded stiffly. Read the remaining records. The sheriff did. One letter described Reverend Crowell delivering warnings to Silas Granger that certain ranchers were close to paying notes and should be pressed quickly before payment could be witnessed. Another listed small donations made to the church building fund after land transfers went through. A third, written by Jonas Pike, complained that Reverend Crowell had grown uneasy and needed reminding that his own name was already tied too deep to pull free cleanly. With every sentence, the Reverend's dignity cracked. Eliza sank fully onto the pew. Rose's anger faded into something heavier. A town could survive one thief. It was harder to survive learning that its shepherd had helped guide wolves to the door. When the final letter was read, no one spoke. Reverend Crowell looked around the church, searching for one loyal face. He found frightened ones, angry ones, grieving ones, but not the blind trust he had expected. At last, he said, I did what I thought necessary to keep this church standing. Eliza made a sound like a sob. There were winters when families had nothing to give, he said, his voice rising now, trying to become righteous again. The roof leaked, the stove failed, children sat shivering through sermons, Jonas offered donations. He said the men who lost land had signed willingly. He said the debts were legal. I carried messages, yes, but I did not steal. Lottie Vane stepped forward. My husband died thinking he had failed me. The Reverend looked at her, then away. Benjamin Miller's voice shook. My sons left Mercy Bend because we lost our lower field. A younger rancher near the back said, You preached patience while Pike took our water rights. The room began to fill with voices, not wild, not violent, but wounded and long overdue. Reverend Crowell raised both hands. I was misled. Eliza stood. No, she said. Everyone turned. Her face was wet with tears, but her voice did not break. I was misled. Lottie was misled. The town was misled. You were afraid, and then you were silent, and then you accepted the benefit of silence. That is not the same thing. The Reverend looked at her as if she had betrayed him. But Eliza, who had spent years asking other women to keep harmony, did not sit down. I will give my statement to the territorial magistrate, she said. All of it. Sheriff Reed stepped forward. Reverend Crowell, until the magistrate arrives, you will come with me. The Reverend's mouth opened. For a moment Rose thought he might refuse. Then Wade moved into the aisle, not threatening, not touching, only present. Other men stood too. Miller, Abbott, Cooper, men who had been quiet too long and were done being ashamed of trusting the wrong people. Reverend Crowell looked at them and understood there was no sermon left strong enough to carry him out of this. He went with the sheriff. The church emptied slowly after that. No one seemed to know how to step back into ordinary daylight after so much truth had been spoken under one roof. Women gathered around Eliza, but she did not lean into their comfort. Not yet. Lottie stood near Rose, holding her old account box against her chest like something rescued from deep water. Ada Pike remained by the back wall. Rose walked to her. Ada lifted her chin by habit, but the pride in the gesture had lost its teeth. I was cruel to you, Ada said. Yes, Rose answered. Ada gave a small, bitter laugh. You never do soften a thing. Not when softening it would make it false. Ada nodded, eyes bright. Jonas is my brother. I know. I loved him once, before he became this, or maybe before I knew he was this. Rose looked at her carefully. Both are grief. Ada's face crumpled for one breath before she forced it still. I helped him by keeping quiet, Ada whispered. So did many people. That does not excuse me. No. Ada looked toward Lottie, then Eliza, then the lifted floorboards near the vestry. What do I do now? Rose thought of all the answers people like to give in stories. Apologize, change, make amends. But real harm was not washed away by one tearful afternoon. Start by telling the truth where it costs you, Rose said. Then keep doing it after people stop praising you for it. Ada absorbed that like a hard lesson. Then she nodded. Outside, Wade waited beside the wagon. Rose could feel exhaustion settling into her bones now. The smoke from the barn still lived in her throat. Her dress smelled of ash and church dust. Her mind ached from papers, voices, and the weight of being looked at by an entire town that had finally realized the woman it called proud had been the one reading clearly. Wade took the account box from Lottie and set it safely in the wagon, then helped the widow climb up beside them. They would take her home first. As Rose climbed onto the seat, Wade's hand closed around hers a little longer than necessary. She looked at him. He did not speak while Lottie was near, but his eyes said what the moment allowed. I am here. Rose held his gaze and answered the same way. So am I. The ride through Mercy Bend felt different now. People stood along the boardwalks, not whispering, not smiling, not yet knowing what to do with themselves. Some looked ashamed. Some looked grateful. Some looked angry because truth had disturbed the shape of their lives, and not everyone thanks the hand that opens a locked door. At Lottie's small house, Wade carried the account box inside. Rose followed and found 3 more papers tucked in the kitchen drawer, all bearing Pike and Granger's marks. Lottie began to cry when she saw them, not loudly, not helplessly, but with the exhausted grief of a woman learning she had been right to feel afraid. Rose sat with her until the tears eased. When they left, the sun was lowering toward the ridge. The Harlan ranch came into view at dusk, wounded but standing. The blackened barn ribs cut against the pink sky. The horses grazed near the far fence, alive and nervous. The house windows glowed with the fire Rose had banked before they left. Home. The word came to her before she could stop it. Wade pulled the wagon to a halt. Neither of them moved right away. Finally, he said, "The barn can be rebuilt." "Yes." "The hay will be harder." "Yes." "The west pasture may still be tied up until the magistrate rules." "Yes." He looked at her. "You are not making this sound easier. I thought you preferred honest women." His smile came slowly, tired and real. "I do." Rose looked toward the burned barn. "Then honestly, this will be hard." Wade nodded, and honestly. She turned back to him. He took off his hat, holding it between his hands the way he had on their wedding day. The gesture made him look both strong and uncertain. "I do not dread hard things the same way when you are standing beside me." Rose's breath caught. The evening wind moved softly across the yard. Ash rustled near the barn. Somewhere the red mare gave a low, calming sound. Wade looked down for a second, then back at her. "I know ours was not a love match when you came." "No," Rose said quietly. "I know I asked for a wife because the house was empty and the work was too much." "Yes." "And I know you came because you needed a place where your life would not keep shrinking." Rose's throat tightened. Wade stepped closer. "But somewhere between the ledger, the fire, the church, and every quiet night in that house, I stopped thinking of you as the woman who answered my letter." His voice roughened. "I started thinking of you as the woman I look for whenever truth gets heavy." Rose could not answer. Not at once. She had believed herself too sensible for this kind of trembling, too old for girlish hope, too careful to be undone by a man with soot still on his cuff and worry in his eyes. But love did not arrive the way she expected. It came like Wade did, quietly, plainly, with work-worn hands and no wasted words. Tell me in the comments if you were Rose. Would you be ready to trust your heart after everything this town had put her through? Rose looked toward the house, where 2 chairs waited by the fire. Then she looked back at him. "I'm afraid," she said. Wade's face softened. "Of me?" "No," her voice lowered, "of needing what I have found here." He moved 1 step closer, stopping before closeness became pressure. "I will not use that against you." "I know." "Do you?" She studied him in the fading light. The answer came slowly, but when it came, it was true. "Yes," she whispered, "I do." Wade lifted his hand, then let it fall, as if even now he would not touch her unless invited. That tenderness nearly broke her. Rose reached for him. Only her fingers against his sleeve at first, then her hand in his. Wade closed his fingers around hers with such careful strength that her eyes burned. They stood that way in the yard, between a burned barn and a lit house, with Mercy Benz reckoning behind them and an uncertain future ahead. Then hoofbeats sounded from the road. Both turned. Sheriff Reed rode hard into the yard, his horse lathered and breathing fast. Dust and sweat streaked the sheriff's face, and his hat hung loose down his back by its cord. Wade stepped forward. "Did you find Jonas?" The sheriff swung down, nearly stumbling. "We found his horse near the South Ravine," he said, "saddle empty." Rose's hand tightened around Wade's. Sheriff Reed looked at her, then at him. There was blood on the rocks, but not enough to say he died there. Wade's face went still. The sheriff drew a folded paper from inside his coat, and this was pinned to the saddle. He handed it to Wade. Rose leaned close as Wade opened it. The handwriting was hurried, slanted, angry. "Harlan thinks his bride saved him. Tell her the fire was only the beginning. If she wants the truth finished, she can come alone to the old line cabin before dawn." At the bottom were 3 words. "Come by my fire." The words on the paper seemed to steal the warmth from the whole yard. "Come by my fire." Rose stared at the line until the letters blurred. It was not only a threat, it was mockery. Jonas Pike had taken the gentlest words Wade had ever given her and twisted them into a hook. Wade folded the note slowly. "No," he said. Rose looked at him. "I have not spoken yet." "You do not need to." Sheriff Reed shifted beside his horse. "He is trying to draw her out." "I know exactly what he is doing," Wade said. His voice was calm, but Rose knew him well enough now to hear the dangerous edge under it. The burned barn stood behind them like a black warning. The house glowed softly through the windows. Somewhere in the dark pasture, a horse stamped once and went still. Mercy Bend lay miles away, full of people who had finally begun to understand what silence had cost them. But here, in the yard, the choice felt painfully small. A man in hiding had called for Rose. And Wade was already building a wall with his fear. Rose touched his sleeve. "He asked for me because he thinks I am the weak place." Wade turned to her. "You are not." "I know." "Then do not go." "I did not say I would go alone." His eyes narrowed. Sheriff Reed cleared his throat. "Mrs. Harlan, if Jonas is at the old line cabin, he chose it for a reason. It sits near the ravine road. Too many trees, too many places to hide. It would be foolish to walk into that before sunup." "Then we will not walk into it foolishly," Rose said. Wade shook his head. "Rose." She faced him fully. "I came to this ranch because I was tired of rooms where other people decided what I could bear. Do not make this house another one." The words hurt him. She saw it at once. But they were true, and truth had brought them this far. Wade took off his hat and looked toward the dark road. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Less command, more fear. "I saw that barn burning," he said. "I saw smoke take you. I held you in the mud and thought for one breath that I had found you only to lose you before I had even told you what you were to me." Rose's throat tightened. Sheriff Reed looked away, giving them what little privacy the open yard allowed. Wade stepped closer, his face bare in the starlight. "I am not trying to own your courage. I am trying not to let my fear speak louder than my respect." Rose's anger softened. She reached for his hand. "Then let both speak, your fear and my judgment, we will need both." He closed his fingers around hers. For a moment, neither moved. Then Wade nodded once. They did not ride to the cabin before dawn. That was what Jonas expected. Instead, Sheriff Reed sent 2 trusted riders to watch the South Trail from a distance, while Wade hitched the wagon with no lantern lit. Rose changed from her smoke-stained dress into a plain dark skirt and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. She tucked Jonas's note into her pocket, then took Wade's mother's letter from the mantel and placed it inside the same pocket, close to her heart. Wade saw. "You don't have to carry that." "I want to." His eyes softened. Before they left, Rose stood for one moment in the main room, looking at the 2 chairs by the fire. When she had first arrived, those chairs had been separate islands. Over the months, they had moved nearer almost without permission. Tonight, they stood close enough that one warmth reached both. Home was not always a place that stayed safe. Sometimes home was the place worth making safe. They rode out under a sky crowded with stars. The old line cabin sat 2 miles beyond the South Ravine, tucked in a stand of cottonwoods where the land dipped low and damp. It had belonged once to a trapper, then to no one, then to every boy in Mercy Bend who needed a dare. Wade knew the trail. Sheriff Reed knew the blind turn before the creek. Rose knew men like Jonas Pike were most dangerous when cornered by their own pride. They stopped before the final bend. Sheriff Reed took 2 men and circled wide through the trees. Wade dismounted and helped Rose down, though this time his hand did not linger. Not because he felt less, but because the moment required steadiness. "You stay behind me if he comes out fast," Wade whispered. "I will stay where sense tells me." That is not as comforting as you think. It was not meant to be. Even in the dark, she saw the faint pull of his mouth. Then they saw the fire. A small glow burned outside the cabin, low and red, throwing thin light across the trees. A man sat beside it with his hat low and one arm resting across his knee. Jonas Pike. He looked smaller than Rose expected. Not weak, not harmless, but stripped of the polished certainty he had worn in doorways and church aisles. His coat was torn at one shoulder. His face was bruised near the cheek. A dark stain marked his sleeve, though she could not tell how badly he was hurt. He lifted his head when Rose stepped into the open. "Well," he called, "the brave bride came." Wade stepped out beside her. Jonas laughed once. "Not alone, I see." Rose stopped several yards from the fire. "You wrote the note badly if you expected obedience." Jonas's eyes flashed. "I expected pride." "You keep mistaking that for intelligence." Wade's hand shifted at his side, but he did not move. Jonas looked at him. "She has made you less careful, Harlan." "No," Wade said, "she made me honest." The word struck Rose quietly and deeply, even there with danger breathing around them. Jonas rose with effort. His left leg dragged slightly. "Honesty is a luxury for people who already have what they need." "No," Rose said, "dishonesty is the luxury. Other people pay for it." He turned on her. "You think you saved this town. They will smile at you now because they need you. But wait until they do not. Wait until you speak too plainly at supper or correct the wrong woman's figures or fail to laugh at some foolish joke. They will remember you are not one of them." Rose felt the truth inside the cruelty. Mercy Bend might never fully become easy. Some people would always find her too direct. Some would thank her with tight mouths. Some would accept her only because Wade loved her, not because they understood her. But the thought no longer frightened her the same way. "I know," she said. Jonas blinked. Rose stepped closer to the firelight. "I know some of them may never like me. I know truth does not make a woman beloved overnight. I know a town can apologize with one hand and keep measuring with the other." Wade watched her, silent and proud. "But I also know something you never understood," she continued. "Being liked by false people is not the same as being loved by true ones." Jonas's face twisted. From the trees behind him came the faintest snap. Jonas heard it. His hand went inside his coat. Wade moved first, not toward violence but toward Rose, pulling her behind the thick trunk of a cottonwood as Sheriff Reed's voice rang through the trees. "Jonas Pike, take your hand out slow." For one terrible second, Rose thought Jonas would choose a final foolish act. But the man's courage, like most of his power, had depended on other people being afraid first. He pulled out his hand empty. Sheriff Reed and the two riders came from the trees. One took Jonas by the arm. Jonas fought only with words. He called them cowards, traitors, fools. He said the magistrate would never make the charges hold. He said half the town had signed papers and signatures mattered more than tears. Rose watched him speak, until his words no longer sounded like power. They sounded like a locked door being kicked from inside. As Sheriff Reed tied his hands, Jonas turned once more toward Rose. "You think he chose you," he said. "He chose trouble." Wade stepped close to Rose, not hiding her, not shielding her from words she could answer herself, but standing where he had promised to stand. "Yes," Rose said, "and I chose him back." Jonas had no reply to that. Dawn came while they rode back toward Mercy Bend. It rose slowly over the prairie, pale gold spreading across the grass, touching the ravine, the cottonwoods, the tired horses, and the faces of people who had spent the night chasing old wrongs through dark country. Rose rode beside Wade, wrapped in her shawl, with smoke still faint in her hair and Wade's mother's letter resting in her pocket. At the edge of town, people were already gathering. News traveled faster than wagons. Men stood outside the sheriff's office. Women clustered near the church steps. Lottie Vane was there, holding her account box. Eliza Crowell stood beside her, pale but upright. Ada Pike waited near the dry goods porch, her face unreadable until she saw Jonas brought in. Then she lowered her head. Not in defense. In grief. Jonas was taken into the sheriff's office to wait for the territorial magistrate. Reverend Crowell had already given a partial confession before sunrise, naming the payments, the messages, and the donations that had stained the church he claimed to protect. Judge Bellamy formally removed himself from the case and sent all papers to Silver Junction. By noon, old debts were sealed for review, land transfers were frozen, and Mercy Bend began the painful work of learning exactly how much had been taken. Justice did not arrive with cheering. It came with tired faces, signed statements, returned papers, and men who could not meet widows' eyes. Over the next weeks, the truth widened. The magistrate ruled the Harlan note paid and void. Miller's lower field was returned through a settlement. Lottie Vane's supposed debt was erased. Several land transfers were placed under formal challenge. Pike and Granger's office closed, its shelves emptied under supervision while townspeople stood outside in a silence far different from gossip. Jonas Pike was taken to Silver Junction for trial. Reverend Crowell left Mercy Bend under guard, not as a monster from a frightening tale, but as something harder for the town to face. A trusted man who had chosen silence, then comfort, then lies. Eliza stayed. That surprised many people. It did not surprise Rose. Eliza moved into the small back room of the church for a time and began helping families sort papers. She did not ask to be forgiven quickly. She did not make a performance of shame. She simply worked, day after day, with ink-stained fingers and red eyes, telling the truth where it cost her. Ada Pike stayed too. Her apology to Rose came one cold afternoon in front of the dry goods store. "I cannot undo what I said," Ada told her. "No," Rose answered. "I cannot undo what I ignored." "No." Ada swallowed. "But I can make sure no woman who comes into this store is made small for knowing her own mind." Rose studied her. "That would be a beginning." Ada nodded. "Then I will begin." It was not friendship. Not yet. But it was something better than a false smile. Winter came hard that year. The burned barn was rebuilt smaller at first, then stronger. Men from Mercy Bend came to raise the frame, some out of guilt, some out of respect, and some because Wade Harlan had helped half of them at one time or another, and they had finally remembered the debt love owes to fairness. Rose stood near the new posts with a ledger in one hand and directed the placement of supplies so efficiently that Benjamin Miller laughed and said the barn might stand straighter than the church. No one told Rose to soften her answer when she corrected the beam count. The west pasture stayed Harlan land. In spring, the creek ran high but clear because Wade built the stone lip around the lower well exactly as Rose had suggested on her first ride from the station. He told her so with a straight face, as if it had not taken him months to say it. "You were right," he said. Rose looked at the raised stones. "I often am." Wade smiled. "I have noticed." Their marriage changed in the quiet way real things change. There was no single grand moment when Rose stopped being a practical wife and became beloved. It happened in pieces. Wade bringing her coffee before dawn. Rose leaving a dry pair of gloves near the door when the weather turned. His hand finding hers during church when old whispers tried to rise. Her laughter surprising them both at the supper table. The two chairs by the fire touching legs for the first time, and neither of them moving them apart. One evening after the first spring rain, Rose found Wade standing on the porch, looking toward the rebuilt barn. She came beside him. "You are thinking loudly." "I did not know that was possible." "It is when a quiet man does it." He looked down at her, and the softness in his face still had the power to unsteady her. "I was thinking about the day you arrived," he said. "You stepped off that train like you expected the whole town to judge you and had already decided to survive it." "I had practice." "I wish you had not needed it." "So do I." The last light stretched over the valley. New grass showed green beneath the fence rails. The red mare grazed near the barn, calm and shining after a winter of good care. Wade reached into his coat pocket and drew out a small folded paper. Rose recognized it at once. His mother's letter. "I read it again today," he said. Rose waited. "She told me to build my fire high enough that the woman I loved would know where home was." Rose's breath caught on the word loved. Wade turned fully toward her. His hands were rough. His voice was low. His eyes held all the things he had learned to stop hiding. "I love you, Rose Harlan." The world went very still. Even the wind seemed to wait. Rose had once believed love would require her to become easier, softer in false ways, less exact, less honest, less herself, but Wade looked at her as if every difficult edge had become part of what he cherished. Her eyes burned. "I love you too," she said. The words came quietly, but they were not small. Wade reached for her hand, then paused, still asking without words. Rose stepped into him and laid her cheek against his chest. This time his arms came around her slowly, carefully, and completely. Behind them, the house waited with lamplight in the windows. Inside, the fire had already been built, not because the night was cold, but because Wade built it every evening now, even in mild weather, as if keeping a promise to the woman who had crossed the country to find a place where she would not have to shrink. Later, they sat in the 2 chairs by the hearth, though the chairs were so close now they may as well have been one. Rose held Wade's mother's letter in her lap. "She would have liked you," Wade said. Rose looked at the flames. "Because I found her letter." "No," his thumb brushed lightly over her hand, "because you made me brave enough to obey it." Rose smiled then, full and unguarded. Outside, Mercy Bend was changing slowly, not perfectly, not easily, but truly. The church had a new preacher by summer. The aid circle kept a small account book that any woman could read. Lottie Vane learned to manage her own money and later taught 2 other widows. Eliza worked until people stopped whispering when she entered a room. Ada still spoke sharply, but now she aimed her sharpness more carefully, often at men who deserved it. And Rose Harlan rode into town with her back straight. Some still called it pride. Wade called it strength. One Sunday after service, a new young bride stood alone near the church steps, nervous under the eyes of women who had not yet learned how quickly judgment could become cruelty. Rose saw the girl's trembling hand and the valise at her feet. Without asking permission from the town, Rose walked over. "Come with me," she said. The girl looked startled. "Where?" Rose glanced toward the wagon, where Wade waited with his hat in his hands and warmth in his eyes. "Home," Rose said. "There is a fire waiting." Wade heard the words. His smile came slow, private, and full of memory. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more romantic Wild West stories where love is not loud, but it stands firm when the whole town turns away. That evening, as sunset laid gold across the valley, Rose and Wade sat together by their hearth. The rebuilt barn stood strong beyond the window. The west pasture rolled wide and safe under the open sky. His mother's letter rested on the mantel, no longer hidden, no longer painful, but honored. Rose looked at the flames and thought of the frightened woman who had stepped from the train months ago, carrying books, caution, and a heart trained not to expect too much. She had come west to become a wife. She had found a home. And Wade Harlan, who had once thought peace meant keeping everyone comfortable, had learned that love sometimes meant choosing one woman's truth over an entire town's approval. He reached for her hand. Rose gave it gladly. Outside, the prairie wind moved softly over Mercy Bend, carrying away the last ash of an old silence. Inside, by the fire, nothing needed to be proven anymore.